Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. Coming up on today's programme, we're talking about that shock diagnosis of the King's cancer. We'll be speaking to the King's former press secretary and also the historian, Anthony Selden.
We'll also speak to cancer specialists about the King's condition.
Yeah, we don't normally do that. You threw me.
Plus, we'll get reaction from around the world, including here, where we'll be joined by the Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride.
We certainly will. It is Tuesday, the 6th of February. Prince William expected to hold the fort and take on extra public duties along with other senior royals after the King said he shared his cancer diagnosis to prevent speculation.
I would say it's definitely good that they're being more transparent. I think it's kind of bringing the monarchy into a new age.
I think it will lead to, more people getting checked.
We're live at Buckingham Palace with the latest through the breakfast show as Prince Harry prepares to head to the UK and his father undergoes treatment. The palace says he is wholly positive. A new sighting and a man arrested on suspicion of hiding the Clapham chemical attack suspect. We'll have the very latest. Revealed a Sky News investigation uncovers how mentally unwell prisoners waiting for a hospital transfer are taking matters into their own hands.
When you're psychotic and depressed, being locked away in a cell is one of the worst things you can do to someone because you have access to things you can self-harm with. You have access to razor blades.
Captain Tom's spa demolition. We look through the latest images of its demise, including this giant pool being winched off-site. And don't miss our big debate at 8:30 about the morning after pill. Should it be sold prescription-free from the supermarket? Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us on The Breakfast Show. Our top story this morning is about the shock news that the King has cancer. Prince William is expected to take on some extra public duties alongside other senior royals, including the Queen, as his father undergoes treatment. While the palace did not name the type of cancer, they say the King remains wholly positive about his treatment. The King said he chose to share the very private news to stop speculation. Matthew Thompson reports.
As the King made his way to church at Sandringham on Sunday, it was just another day in the royal routine. What was to follow was anything but. He would shortly make his way back to London to start treatment for cancer. It's just over a week since the King left hospital following surgery for an enlarged prostate. But we're told it's not prostate cancer.
How are you feeling?
We now know it was here that his cancer was discovered. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, during the King's recent hospital procedure for benign prostate enlargement, a separate issue of concern was noted. Subsequent diagnostic tests have identified a form of cancer. His Majesty has chosen to share his diagnosis to prevent speculation and in the hope it may assist public understanding for all those around the world who are affected by cancer. And outside the palace, the public agreed.
If he's doing this as a king, as a leader, I think it will lead to, more people getting checked.
It's definitely good that they're being more transparent. I think it's kind of bringing the monarchy into a new age. I think given how private everything was before.
To go public with such a private matter is unusual by recent royal standards, to say the least. But there's hope in the announcement that it may have been caught early.
It's a good job that this has been detected. I mean, the name of the game with any form of cancer is early detection and early treatment. And the earlier you pick things up, the more likely the treatment is to be completely curative.
The King shared the news personally with his three siblings and both sons. Prince Harry, who's not been in the UK since his court appearance in June, will travel here in the coming days. No time frame has been given for the 75-year-old monarch's treatment, and doctors have advised he postpone his public duties. But he remains king and will carry on working behind the scenes on matters of state. Prince William will return to work this week after taking time to support his wife after her abdominal surgery. He, along with other members of the family, like the Princess Royal and the Queen, will be the key royals expected to hold the fort in public. The Queen will continue with her official duties. Just last week, she opened a cancer centre. Sharing such personal information is a change of tack for the royal family. or perhaps be hoping that going public with the King's diagnosis will mean he can now recover much more privately. Matthew Thompson, Sky News.
Let's bring in Alistair Bruce, standing by outside Buckingham Palace for us this morning. Goodness, Alistair, what a shock, although we're hearing that the King remains wholly positive.
Well, the King is always very positive, but everyone gets shocked by cancer as a challenge in any family. And I think for the King, with his reign only just beginning, with so many plans that he had, especially later this year, of travelling off to different parts of the Commonwealth, to be struck by the need to now concentrate on the treatments that he will need, I just don't think he kind of comprehended that. And it will impact very much on all the royal family, and for the Queen too, to back him up through that challenge. But I think, as you say, he's a very positive man, and he's emotional. He likes to be open with his feelings, and I think that's why we've heard about it and it's all been brought to our attention.
OK, for now, thank you, Alistair, live from Buckingham Palace. Let's bring in Ashish, joining us here in the studio. Hi, Ashish. I'm just looking at the stats. A third of all diagnosed cancers are with people 75 and over. The King is 75.
He's in that age range. So for men, it's between the ages of 70 and 80. Those 2 decades, that's when most diagnoses are made for cancer, for specific types of cancer. But there are no screening tests available for male cancers except bowel cancer. So it's great that the King underwent treatment. This was picked up. We can only hope it was picked up early. And the palace haven't told us very much about the cancer itself, and the King is entitled to his privacy. But we do know that some sort of therapy, some sort of treatment has commenced. So straight away. So it's normally diagnosis. So you have the biopsy, identify the type of cancer. Then the staging, so how far it spread from where it actually started. And then also they'll have some sort of assessment of the patient. How fit is that patient for the treatment that he will undergo? All of these will be factors. And then there's a possibility that if it's a small contained cancer, there will be a surgical intervention. Or then, of course, you have the therapies. You have the immunotherapy, radiography, and chemotherapy as well. It sounds as though these have begun already. Let's have a look at the stats in this country for cancer. We know it's extremely prevalent, especially among that age range. The King's diagnosis is far from unusual. 1 in 2 people will develop some sort of cancer in their lifetime. Survival rates in the UK have doubled to 50% over the past 5 decades. Every year in the UK, there are some 375,000 new cases of cancer, and that amounts to about 1,000 cases every day. So successful outcomes really depend on how quickly the cancer is identified and how soon the treatment begins, and obviously depending on where it's spread in the body.
I was speaking to a specialist last night, and he told me that within the next decade, all of us will contract 3 types of cancer, and it won't kill us. Any of those 3, we will not die from it.
It's alarming. I think all of us will know somebody who's been affected by cancer. And the great thing about the King and the palace, by coming forward and announcing it so quickly, we saw what happened with his treatment for the enlarged prostates. Many more men going forward to have their own health checked out. We can only hope this will encourage more people to investigate their own health further.
Yeah, indeed. So for now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Somebody diagnosed with cancer every 2 minutes here in the UK. Thoughts with lots of you this morning. You know, if you are dealing with a cancer diagnosis in your family, our heart goes out to you. We are thinking about you. Big hugs from us.
Very much so indeed. We'll be speaking to oncologists, won't we, throughout the course of the day as well. Plenty more news happening. Let's bring you up to speed with the news this morning. Investigators of the chemical attack in Clapham on Wednesday have arrested a man on suspicion of hiding the main suspect. Police have also released new CCTV images of the suspect, Abul Azadi, the day before the attack, buying groceries in Newcastle. On day 6 of the manhunt, our national correspondent Tom Parmenter has the latest.
As he bought his groceries, he seemed chatty and relaxed. 24 hours later, The police believe he attacked a woman and 2 children with alkaline in Clapham, southwest London. The children have now recovered, but their mother is still sedated and has serious facial injuries. In every image of Azadi since the attack, his own facial wound has been very clear. The latest sighting of him was here, near Southwark Bridge in central London, at 9:47 after the attack. Officers have now arrested a 22-year-old man on suspicion of helping him.
Anybody who is harbouring Azadi or is thinking of helping Azadi in some way or another, we will take that very seriously and we will take action. So that man came into custody, he's been interviewed, and we're following up a number of lines of inquiry as a consequence of that.
The Met Police do have the suspect's phone, which was left in Clapham. Unpicking his relationship with the victim is a key line of inquiry.
This could go on for a long time. The police will be very, very keen to try and resolve this as quickly as possible. But the longer it goes on, the more of a political story it will be around how the Home Office manages asylum seekers.
£20,000 is still on offer for information that leads to Azadi's arrest. The search is focused on his movements in London and also his life here in Newcastle. But in Manchester on Saturday night, armed police rushed into Piccadilly Station after a possible sighting. It wasn't him, but it shows just how police forces across the country are on high alert. And it will be that way until he's found. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Newcastle.
A British-owned cargo ship has sustained minor damage after being hit by what's been described as a projectile while sailing off Yemen's coast. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Agency says no one was injured and the ship carried on. Houthi rebel attacks on shipping among the issues that are being discussed by the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken as his Middle East trip continues to Egypt today. An American porn star has sparked anger after visiting Iran. That's despite the risks of being detained and sentenced to death. Activists have criticised the decision by Whitney Wright, who filmed herself in Tehran and visited the abandoned US embassy. The 32-year-old has been an advocate for Palestinians during the Israel-Hamas war. Red Bull's F1 team principal Christian Horner will remain in his role while being investigated over allegations of inappropriate behaviour. The 50-year-old, who's married to the former Spice Girl, Geri Halliwell, has denied any wrongdoing. Red Bull says the investigation's being carried out by an external barrister. Liz Truss is launching a new movement today dubbed the Popular Conservatives, or PopCons for short. The former Prime Minister, whose short-lived administration lasted just 44 days, hopes to pile pressure on Rishi Sunak to cut taxes and embrace tougher immigration policies. And a new species of pterosaur has been discovered on the Isle of Skye in Scotland. The winged reptile lived between 168 and 166 million years ago during the Middle Jurassic period. That's when dinosaurs roamed the Earth. It's been named Scioptera avanse. Researchers said it was a complete surprise because most of its close relatives are from China.
Let's talk about a special Sky News investigation. Alice is here. Tell me more. Morning.
Good morning. Yes, we've been given exclusive access to a report by His Majesty's Chief Inspector for Prisons, which highlights just how long acutely unwell prisoners are waiting before they're transferred to hospital. They should be transferred within 28 days, but their report found that that doesn't happen in 85% of cases, with one prisoner waiting more than a year. We are talking about prisoners who are acutely unwell with conditions such as schizophrenia, bipolar. The Chief Inspector highlighted a case where he came across a prisoner who was so unwell he was, in effect, attempting to disembowel himself. So these are people who are very unwell. The longer they wait, the worse they get. Many of these people will, of course, be dangerous individuals and violent, but there are many of those who are simply unwell. Now, I spoke to a woman who we're calling Bryony. She had no criminal record at all. She was arrested in the midst of what we now realise was bipolar disorder crisis, and this is very much her story, but with warning that it does contain very strong references to self-harm.
They started about 10 years ago, and I saw numerous psychiatrists, but none of them picked up on the fact that I was deeply unwell. I developed a delusion that this local ex-policeman had drugged my food from a Chinese takeaway with tapeworm eggs. It was all in my head, but it was very real to me.
Bryony, not her real name, had undiagnosed bipolar disorder. She was arrested for malicious communication and attempted arson, but instead of going to hospital, she went to prison.
It was the worst experience of my life. I started to self-harm because we were allowed razors in our cell. It was basically a way to cope with my surroundings. When you're psychotic and depressed, being locked away in a cell is one of the worst things you can do to someone. It was just a shocking trajectory, really, from happy student to being locked away.
So that was Bryony's experience of prison there. Now, after 6 months in prison, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she finally got her diagnosis and began treatment. So there's the issue of prisoners who are very unwell waiting long periods before they're transferred to hospital, but there's also concern about people who are being sent to prison simply because there are no beds available in the community. And I was quite shocked to discover that prison continues to be used as a place of safety, and that's what it's called. And it means that someone can be arrested during a mental health crisis, and instead of going to hospital, they find themselves in prison. And so there are cases of people who've been arrested while they've been trying to take their own life, and instead of getting hospital care, they've instead gone to prison. And many people are concerned about whether we're effectively criminalising people who are mentally unwell.
OK, for now, thanks so much indeed. Well, a government spokesperson has told us this. Providers in prison have clear processes in place to identify, assess and treat offenders with mental health needs. NHS England is investing in post-custody care to help prison leavers access their community-based health services. Providers in prison have clear processes in place to identify, assess and treat offenders with mental health needs. NHS England is investing in post-custody care to help prison leavers access their community-based health services. Well, if you or anyone you know has been affected by the issues in that story, you can call the Samaritans on 116 123 on your screen now, 116 123, or email joe@samaritans.org. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Prolonged early rain through central parts will clear into the south later, with colder air following. Expect some wintry hazards this week. It's cloudy, mild and windy for most, with rain through central parts, but northern Scotland is frosty with icy stretches. Wales, northern England and the south of Ireland will see rain largely taking over this morning, while Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland and southern Scotland will brighten up.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Let's bring in the Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride, this morning. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Good morning. Obviously, keen to hear your reaction to the news about the King yesterday.
Well, very concerning, and I know that millions of people up and down the country will be concerned. Thoughts go out to him, but also the Queen, of course, his family. But I think it's very typical of him that he will be continuing his state-facing roles. And there's those private things that will make sure that governance and the British state keeps functioning. He will keep doing that, albeit that he's going to be stepping down from his public-facing activities. But it's great that we have a Prince of Wales who is so competent and very good at what he does, who will be stepping in for many of those occasions. But we'll wish him well, and we hope that this is a passing phase that passes quickly.
As do we all. Yeah. How concerned are you, let's talk about Clapham, that Abdul Shukr Azidi, obviously wanted in connection with that Clapham attack, was a convicted sex offender and converted to Christianity and was allowed to stay?
Well, I am very concerned, obviously, about those that have been impacted by this terrible event, and my thoughts and heart goes out to them and their loved ones. I can't comment on the specifics of an individual who is a subject now of an ongoing police investigation. But let me make a couple of really important general points. The first is that we have made it very clear, and we have legislated for this, that those that come to our country illegally will not be granted asylum. We have some legislation going through Parliament at the moment, the Rwanda Act, to make sure that Rwanda is seen as a safe third country so that we can remove people from our shores who have come here and send them to Rwanda. And on the case of those that have committed criminal activities specifically, since January 2019, we have actually removed about 14,000 individuals who are exactly in that category. And that's through arrangements we have with other countries, including, for example, Albania. So we take this very, very seriously. But on Azidi's particular case, we really need to wait until that investigation concludes.
What about those that are, some might say, abusing the Christian faith in order to gain asylum? About 40 people aboard the Bibi Stockholm are presently converting to Christianity.
Well, those caseworkers who assess asylum claims, of course, are very careful in the deliberations that they undertake when they look at somebody's claim. And I don't believe it's the case that they just simply take at face value the fact that somebody is of one faith one moment and decides to convert to another faith the next, with an obvious potential benefit in terms of asylum. They look at these cases extremely carefully. But I do think that in the case that we talk about with Azidi, it's going to be very important that we do look particularly carefully at that aspect. But as I say, at the moment, part of an ongoing police case, so not for me to speculate.
OK. The government is giving out the first of 3 cost of living payments to low-income households today. What can you tell us about it?
Well, it's £299. It will go out from today. The last payment will be made on the 22nd of February. It will go out to about 8 million low-income households. Those are households that might typically be on universal credit, tax credits or pension credit. It's an automatic payment, so you don't need to apply for it, and it'll appear on your bank statement as COL, which is for cost of living, and then your national insurance number. And it's really there because we recognise that times have been very tough for people over quite a period of time, particularly with the inflation we've had from the war in Ukraine, and before that, of course, the terrible economic consequences of COVID. So it's the last of 3 payments that total £900. We had 6.5 million disabled people in addition to that, receiving £150, hundreds of pounds for pensioners as well, to make sure that we're doing all that we possibly can to help people through what we know is a difficult period.
Would you bet 3 times that amount that asylum seekers will find themselves in Rwanda before the next election?
I think you're referring to the Piers Morgan situation. I didn't see it. It's not. I'm not a gambling man, so I'm not going to get involved in whether I would bet or not. I'm not a betting person. But I think what the Prime Minister was very clear about is that we have to get those boats down.
A television presenter, £1,000. Yeah. I mean, crass. Surely.
Well, as I say, I haven't seen it, so I don't know exactly how it unravelled at the time. Well, it may be these things tend to get into the papers.
It's
but
something that
look, the most important, Kate, the really important thing...
Is it something you wouldn't have done?
Well, I'm not a gambling person, so I just probably wouldn't have entered into bets on anything, even the Grand National. But look,
is it appropriate that he would...
What is appropriate is, and what people really care about here, is not these kind of sideshows that may occupy newsprint, but is getting the boats down. That's the important thing. Now, we've managed to, through our activities... Well, hold on. We have reduced the number of those illegal crossings by 34% in the last year. Across the rest of Europe, those numbers have been going up very dramatically, about 80% in the case of countries like Italy, where we've had arrangements in place with Albania. We've seen a drop of over 90% of nationals coming across illegally from that country. If we can get our Rwanda deal through as part of our plan, then I think we can make huge gains in terms of squeezing down the number that are illegally coming here and incidentally putting their lives at risk, as we so often see when tragedies occur in the Channel. And I think that is what people really care about. That's part of a very clear plan, incidentally. It's one that Labour opposed.
I know Labour's not got a plan. Labour's not got a plan.
Well, they haven't. You're saying it, but and so is everybody. And so is everybody else. So is everybody else.
About this £1,000.
Do tell me what their plan is. I'd love to know.
300 quid is what will be landing in people's bank balances today, and it's
299. Yeah.
And yet the Prime Minister is betting £1,000 willy-nilly that one of his plans will work. I mean, it's just crass.
Well, as I say, I think all of that stuff, to me, I didn't see it, but it just seems to be a rather a sideshow to what is the main and the most important thing. What people really care about is they want to see illegal migration under control. And that is what we are definitely moving towards. We are seeing those numbers shrinking, 34% compared to the rest of Europe, where those numbers are going up, in some cases very dramatically. We're making progress. We've got a plan to deliver on getting those numbers down further. It's being opposed by Labour, who have no plan, Kay. And I know people are being fed up with people talking about Labour's no plan, but it is a reality.
We're going to clip you up saying Labour have no plan. We've got a big wall full of them.
Well, I hope so. But, well, you tell me, what is their plan?
It's not for me to tell you Labour's plan.
You look at these things and you
Secretary of
notice
State.
whether
Tell me
people have
about
a plan.
Lord Cameron. Should he be approved to join debates in the House of Commons?
Well, look, there's a very clear set of conventions around those that appear on the floor of the House of Commons and at the dispatch box, and that is that if you're an elected member of the lower house, then
I know.
Then you can. And,
well,
and
the cross-party
don't.
procedure committee's recommended that he should be allowed to come to the bar, which apparently is a white line. So
Correct.
he can actually...
Yeah, it's just when you first walk into the chamber.
Should that happen?
Well, these are matters for Parliament and for the House of Commons because they are procedural, so they're not for the government. It's not for me as a minister to start opining on that. But let's see what comes out of that. But where we've had instances of that kind of situation in the past, in other words, a member of the Cabinet who is in the Lords, we have not done that. We have actually had, Peter Mandelson would be one example, had those ministers carrying out their function in the House of Lords. We have an excellent Cabinet Minister in Andrew Mitchell, who is able to take questions on foreign affairs at the dispatch box in the Commons. But these are matters for the Commons, and it'll be interesting to see what the Procedure Committee comes forward with.
OK, well, that's what they've come forward with. They've recommended in the report that Lord Cameron should take questions from MPs at the bar.
OK, well, I haven't read the report. I'm not sure how practical that is, sort of standing by the doorway while questions are directed at you. But anyway, I haven't read their report, so... I'd have to have a look at the detail, I think.
OK, well, you heard it here first on Sky News, didn't you?
Well, I hear many things first on Sky News.
It's good to see you, Minister.
Nice
Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Let's head down to the Palace. Rhiannon's there for us. Latest on the King. Rhiannon, good morning.
So, as the Palace said yesterday, they are unlikely to be giving us any running updates in terms of the King's treatment, but we know that he spent the night in London last night after starting that treatment for cancer yesterday. In terms of what I've been hearing from conversations that I've been having, the word that keeps coming up is that everybody is trying to stay positive. And one person pointed to that photo that we saw on Sunday of the King walking at Sandringham, smiling, waving, and I was told that he wasn't putting that on. He is trying to stay as upbeat as possible. But of course, any cancer diagnosis for any patient and their family is going to be hugely worrying. And then, of course, you have to couple that with the fact that they had to decide exactly how they were going to announce this to the world. Very conscious that it would be spread globally. And of course, he wanted to make sure that he spread that news to show other families his support for them in terms of how difficult these cancer diagnoses can be. But also, I think, try and shut down as much speculation as possible. I'm told that they are likely to try and see if they can show us him working behind the scenes as much as possible, I think, to make sure that the speculation doesn't get out of control, but also the fact that you're dealing with a man who is a known workaholic and will want to continue to do as much as he possibly can.
Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you this morning. We'll speak to a consultant urologist about the King's cancer diagnosis and what shape his treatment could take. More parts of an unauthorised spa, including a pool, are removed, the home of Captain Tom's family.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance.
It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
We found all the roads to one large cluster of facilities were blocked. Those we did reach were fearsome.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to.
Hey. By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets. I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling. Those hills over there, that's Russia.
Is this military ready?
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
Hello again, everybody. You're watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News, waking up to the news that the King has begun his treatment for cancer. We don't know which sort of cancer it is. Prostate cancer is the most common. We're told it's not that in men. Lung cancer, bowel cancer and bladder cancer are also in the top four. We'll be speaking to a consultant urologist about that shortly.
Yes, and remind you of those top stories this morning. The King is said to be wholly positive following that diagnosis. The palace says he looks forward to returning to full public duty as soon as possible. The King has begun a schedule of regular treatments and is said to be receiving expert medical care from a specialist team. Prince William will take on increased public duties while his father's being treated. Meanwhile, the Duke of Sussex has indicated his intention to return to the UK in the coming days after talking to his father about his diagnosis. In other news, investigators of a chemical attack in Clapham last Wednesday have arrested a man on suspicion of hiding the main suspect. Police have also released new CCTV footage of the suspect, Abdul Azidi, the day before the attack, buying groceries in Newcastle. And a Sky News investigation has uncovered how mentally unwell prisoners waiting for a hospital transfer are taking matters into their own hands.
Somebody diagnosed with cancer every 2 minutes in the UK. Goodness me. But most people survive cancer.
Yes. These days, the treatments that we have are amazing, and the medical developments we have come to know really give us hope. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly. He's stepping back from royal duties, although he will carry out his official duties.
Yes, so continue to get those red boxes, continue to perform that constitutional role. We're told he's going to continue to see the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, those weekly meetings in person, unless doctors advise that not to be the case. So kind of professional business as usual, despite the fact that his personal life has been changed by this diagnosis.
Yeah, and also the news that Harry is going to be coming to the UK to see his father. Already spoken to his dad on the phone, or vice versa. I'm not sure which way it went, but he will be coming in the next few days.
Yeah, he'll be coming in the next few days. And also internationally, you know, talking of over the pond, we've seen this outpouring of well-wishing from global leaders, from Joe Biden, the US President, President Trump, as well as the leader of Canada, Justin Trudeau, as well as Emmanuel Macron from France, for instance. But also closer to home, we've seen lots of tweets and comments from from former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, for instance, but also obviously our current Prime Minister. So Rishi Sunak issued his tweet yesterday and he said, wishing His Majesty a full and speedy recovery. I have no doubt he'll be back to full health in no time, and I know the whole country will be wishing him well. And also we've heard from Home Secretary James Cleverly, where he knows and he's been very vocal and public about his wife's battle with breast cancer, as well as we've heard from the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, as well, who also tweeted his well-wishing for the King. So a big outpouring from both sides of the House.
Absolutely. President Trump says he prays for a fast recovery for the King. President Biden saying he is concerned. What are they thinking in Australia? Nicole is there for us. Hi, Nicole. What was the reaction where you are?
Well, this story has had huge coverage in Australia all day. It was the lead story earlier in the day. A speculation and concern, of course. Both the Australian and New Zealand Prime Ministers have said that they wish King Charles a speedy recovery, with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese saying that King Charles had always reached out to this country during its toughest moments. But the biggest question is, what will this mean for the royal tour that was expected in Australia, New Zealand and the island nation of Samoa in October? Now, that royal tour was meant to coincide with a meeting of Commonwealth leaders in Samoa, so a lot of questions about whether or not that will actually happen. There is a great deal of warmth and affection for King Charles here. He spent 6 months earlier in his life as a young schoolboy in Australia, and he's visited this country 16 times.
OK, for now, thank you. So what sort of treatment can the King expect? Dr Rajesh Nair, as a consultant neurologist, is with us now. Good morning. It's nice to see you. Thanks for taking the time to join us. We don't know what sort of cancer it is. So, you know, there's no point in speculating at that at the moment. But there are, I believe, 3 types of treatment for cancer.
Absolutely. First of all, I wish the King a very speedy recovery. Sure. I think you're absolutely right. It's very difficult to speculate exactly what kind of cancer the King is, treatment he's undergoing. There are multiple areas or facets that we can think of. But essentially, there are different types of treatment that exist for cancer. There can be treatment directly into an organ, which can be given in the form of chemotherapy or immunotherapy, and that's particularly the case if there are bladder tumours or bladder cancers which were identified. It may be chemotherapy. It may be radiotherapy. I think it all really depends on the type of tumours that were identified in the King. And again, it's very difficult to speculate as to exactly what's happened, but clearly something has been identified during the whole process of his prostate surgery.
How long does it take to recover?
Again, that's completely dependent on the type of treatment that's being proposed to him.
And the stage of the cancer, I'm guessing.
And the stage of the cancer, exactly. I think usually if we think that there is something identified at the time of his prostate operation and it may be related to his bladder, then often treatments into the bladder are just sessional within hospital. It may just be a couple of hours in hospital to deliver the treatment, and then it will wear him out for a day or two afterwards whilst he recovers. And that's usually the case for most types of chemotherapy or immunotherapy as well.
Do you still lose your hair if you have chemo?
Not all chemotherapy results in hair loss. There are chemotherapies that can be given directly into the bladder, which won't give you any sort of side effects, such as hair loss. There are chemotherapy agents which are given through the veins, which can do. It all depends on the regime of treatment that he has, and I'm sure his doctors are going to be very specialist in terms of that particular area.
OK. What are the side effects, though, apart from losing your hair with having chemotherapy, immunotherapy and the like?
The main side effects that most people experience with any type of treatment is tiredness and fatigue. We'll often need to take a few more naps than normal, might need to rest. So I can understand why he's being cautious about his public duties, which may involve long travel or, particular periods where he's away from his medical team. It's often that we can see that he'd probably be able to do most paperwork or sort of light duties around the house. I suspect beyond that, it's going to be a bit of a challenge, particularly if you're undergoing treatment over a long course or a period of weeks.
Yeah. How would they have picked up this cancer when he was having his treatment? Obviously, as I said, we don't know where it is at this stage, and the King has chosen, or Buckingham Palace has chosen, not to tell us. But it would have been a blood test, or...?
There are different ways that people can pick these up. It can be through his pre-operative blood tests or pre-operative imaging tests, that a tumour may have been identified at the time and then action needed to be taken after his prostate surgery. It may have been during the prostate surgery that they identified an abnormality. Often the type of prostate surgery the King has had will involve an examination of the inside of the bladder, and that may have picked up a polyp or a tumour within it. So those types of tumours can often be detected at the time, and then you react to the circumstances afterwards.
OK, and the success rate for treatment?
Again, depending on it all depends on the grade and the stage of a tumour. So if the stage is advanced, then success is not great. But by all accounts, looking at the information that's been released by the Palace, it sounds like everything is at an early stage, and treatment prospects are quite good in his circumstances, whatever the tumour may be.
My sister's suffering from cancer at the moment, and her treatment is aggressive and ongoing, but apparently it can take up to a year to recover from a cancer. Is that the sort of time frame that we're looking at?
Yes, I think that's right. I think to underestimate, it may be that physically one can recover quite quickly from treatments for cancers, whether that be surgical treatments, chemotherapy or radiotherapy. But psychologically also one does take time to get over a cancer diagnosis as well as a treatment. And there are a lot of survivorship issues that need to be addressed, regardless of who you are, in terms of being told that you have a cancer and you need to have treatment for it.
OK, I'm sure he's in the best hands.
Absolutely.
It's good to talk to you. Thank you for your expertise. Really appreciate you coming in this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bear with me 1 second. The US Secretary of State's latest Middle East tour has moved to Cairo this morning. Antony Blinken is pushing for a hostage deal and to try to dampen regional tensions after American airstrikes in Syria, in Iraq and in Yemen. Our international correspondent John Sparks is in the northern Iraq city of Erbil for us again this morning. Hello to you, John. So the diplomacy continues.
Yeah, morning, Kay. Yeah, I think most of the focus will be concentrated on Antony Blinken's activities today. It's been relatively quiet here after a tumultuous couple of days. Hearing reports that a British-owned ship in the Red Sea was fired at by some sort of projectile by the Houthi militia. Apparently it took evasive actions and got away relatively unscathed. No injuries reported in that incident. Also hearing from the US Central Command that they have destroyed 2 uncrewed surface vehicles in the Red Sea, basically surface-level drones. Again, no casualties there reported, but the Houthi militia at least reporting seemingly no intention there of quitting their activities in terms of trying to disrupt Red Sea activities in the Red Sea. But yeah, I think most of the focus will be on Antony Blinken. It's his 5th tour in the region. He's already been to Saudi Arabia. He'll be trying to put a lid on the tit-for-tat attacks in the region, but also trying to get to the root of all the problems, which lies in Gaza. So it's going to be difficult for him. He may need to extend his business trip.
OK, for now, thank you. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show on Sky News Tuesday morning. What are the implications for the running of the monarchy while King Charles is treated for cancer? Sir Anthony Seldon will be here with some insight.
dana yaakaar ni Europe moo gën Afrique bu fekkee da ngeen a bëgg a dee dem leen. Seydou mais dana dofoo la lan te bu ñu fi bàyyi ñuy des ci désert.
Well, the idea of the movie starts from the desire to give finally visual form to a part of the journey that we usually don't see, because we are used to see only the last part when the boat arriving in Sicily, when they succeed to arrive, and the ritual count of the people alive and dead. And we don't know anything about the journey. We don't know anything about what they pass through. So we decide to make a sort of reverse shot. We put the camera on the other side, not from our point of view. And we try to give to the audience that will see the movie the possibility to live an experience, to live the experience of the journey from the point of view of the main actor. That's the idea that brings us. So to make this movie, I work with the person that for real live this epic journey, because they are the carriers of the contemporary epic. So I wrote the script with them. Mamadou is just beside me. And then on the set, on the image that you saw in the movie, all the extra, they were real migrants. So they could help us to recreate the adventure, because they call adventure.
I was lucky to survive, and I call myself lucky survivor. After seeing this kind of life that we passed through, I think this trauma too, we were able to explain this part of our life, because most of the time people only see people just arriving in Europe by boat, but before we arrive in Europe, they do not see what we face really in our life. And even in desert, you can see that people, children, women are dying.
In Italy has been released in September, and after a week, the Pope, Francis the Pope, wanted to screen the movie in Vatican.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he supported the movie from the beginning.
Hello again, everybody. You're waking up to the news this morning here on Sky that the King has begun his treatment for a cancer diagnosis. Wilfred joining us from Sky News Centre. Goodness, that was a shock last night, wasn't it?
Oh,
Kate,
Kate, sorry, I didn't actually hear your link there, but absolutely shock announcement yesterday, as you said. And I think that no one prepares you for that C word, does it? I mean, cancer, it comes with a great shock, and obviously for his family and for the nation as a whole. What I would say is it comes with a little bit of hope as well. When I was in your seat last Friday, we had Cancer Research UK on, and they did point out in a report that they had that surviving cancer for 10 years or more has hit the highest level yet in the UK, up to 49.8%. But I think that shows the two sides of this. It's very serious, but there's hope as we wait for more details.
Certainly is. We don't know what sort of treatment, but we were hearing from a specialist just a few moments ago that it's an exhausting, however much treatment he needs, it is exhausting having treatment for cancer, both physically and mentally.
Absolutely, and I guess one of the things we kind of are assuming from this is it doesn't require surgery because he's left hospital, but there's a big spread of possible treatments, you know, from chemotherapy, radiotherapy that are very debilitating to immunotherapy that is debilitating but not quite as much. And it's interesting to see some people commend initially how open they've been and now sort of start to call for more details. And I get that a precedent has been set and there are still questions to be answered. But equally, and this sort of underlines the seriousness of everything, is he might not yet know all of the answers. These tests to work out exactly what the right course of treatment is and where it reaches across the body, you know, they take time. And again, I commend how warm and positive, maybe not just he was as he went to church last week, but the Queen was last week, carrying on all these engagements with this knowledge, whether it was overt knowledge yet or just the question that she would have had in her mind that we don't know all the answers yet. And I think a very brave face so far.
And it is obviously something that we should point out, that 300,000 cancer diagnoses, more than that, in the UK every year. So every 2 minutes, a family is going to hear that C word, and they can't hear anything else once they've heard cancer. And that's all they think. It's a death sentence. Having been, I know that you work with lots of charities, having been an ambassador for Macmillan, it's not a death sentence anymore. You were making that point there, Will.
No, and as you said, it feels like it is because it's such a terrifying word, as I was saying at the top. Cancer Research UK, as I was saying, that almost 50% of people in the UK would survive for at least 10 years. Let's hope this is a better circumstance than that. I do think it comes back to family at this point, and hearing those details that he told his two sons and his siblings personally and directly, that's the immediate focus. Of course, there's then a call as the head of state to share this more widely. But yeah, listen, it's a very, very serious moment, and we do await those further details. And of course, everyone wishes him well.
We do, and everyone else who's going through that cancer diagnosis today and indeed tomorrow and the next day and the next day. Thanks very much indeed, Will. Thank you. Joining us now, historian and author Sir Anthony Selton. Hello to you, Sir Anthony. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme this morning. Cancer there is cancer in his family. The Queen Mother, of course, in her later years, the Queen died of old age, but it is thought that she also had a melanoma. So it's not something that the royal family has not come across before. Why do you feel that the King has decided to be so open about his diagnosis?
I think he does like to be open about everything, as we've talked about before, Kay. When he was Prince of Wales, he was too open, many people thought, about his views on a whole range of topics, particularly the environment, but not just the environment. And I think it's part of his style, which is to want to communicate in as far as the medics advising him will know at this stage.
Has he potentially made a rod for his back, though, because he has told us about his prostate prognosis, and now he's told us that he has cancer. Of course, inevitably that leads to other questions. What sort of cancer is it? How advanced is it? How long is he going to be away from his royal duties? The palace much more opaque when it comes to those sort of questions.
Yes, and I suspect they don't know the answer to all of those in a developing medical position. And I mean, the palace might not want us to speculate, but it's inevitable that the country does. I mean, the price of having support across the country for the monarchy is that people will want to know these questions. So it will, I imagine, become clearer in the next few days exactly what he himself can do and what other senior royals will be able to do in his place. But again, Kay, as we often talked about at the time of the Queen's death, it is so striking that there is so much focus and discussion dominating not just British news, but world news in a royal family that is no proper part of a democracy. They're not voted. So what is that role that the monarchy plays in Britain that is clearly so important? And it is a key role in holding this country together.
And we then look to others, including the Duke of Edinburgh, who has also been added to. Now, you'll tell me the name of the list with the family members who step up should the King be incapacitated for any time.
Well, you're referring there to the list of those who are on standby duty to take over.
Forgive me, Anthony, I found it. It's the Regency Act 1937. I knew I had it somewhere.
Kay, your knowledge of history is extraordinary, and indeed it does anticipate the monarchy, as we saw at the time of the Queen's funeral, and the earlier Duke of Edinburgh's funeral anticipates everything often years in advance for an eventuality like this. Now, George VI, who is King Charles's grandfather, himself died in 1952, prematurely in his 50s, and as a young man or middle-aged man, but way before his time. And the royal family, the monarchy, anticipates this. So there is a list of people who can step up. Edinburgh is one, and obviously the Prince of Wales coming back from duty. We expected him to be off duty for a while his wife, Princess Catherine, was unwell. Again, that was an unexpected piece of news. But now he's back to duty. He's got an investiture tomorrow. He's got a London Air Ambulance fundraiser that he's doing. So we're going to be seeing lots of pictures of him. Why is that? To show that the royal family is back in business, doing the work, and others patching in for the currently incapacitated king.
OK. We must leave it there, but it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay.
Do you remember when we were chatting about Captain Tom's Spa?
Yeah.
Poof, it's gone.
It's gone, yeah. Well, the deadline is the 7th of February to demolish it, so they've only got a couple of days left. And it's such a shame after such an kind of impactful legacy, Captain Tom raising so much money for the NHS during COVID, dying at the age of 100. What a hero. And then this kind of tainting his legacy.
And this picture coming up in a moment's time, showing
we're going to see the spa, the actual sort of pool. I'm not sure if it's I'm not sure if that's a jacuzzi or a big pool. What do you think?
It definitely looks like a jacuzzi hot tub to me, rather than a spa pool. I think
it depends how big. It depends how big your spa is.
Well, it does, but it does certainly kind of chip away at the argument that this was for therapy and for kind of rehab and R&R, etc.
Yeah. Oh, Captain Tom. Makes me sad.
It is very sad, yeah.
We'll be back in just a couple of moments. Latest on the King. Morning, everybody. It's 8 o'clock. Coming up on today's programme, we're going to be talking about that shock diagnosis of the King's cancer. We'll be speaking to the King's former press secretary.
We've also spoken to one cancer specialist who had some interesting thoughts about the King's condition. We'll bring you that later.
Plus, we'll be talking about that Clapham attack at 9:30 with a survivalist from Hunted.
It's Tuesday, the 6th of February. Prince William expected to hold the fort and take on extra public duties along with other senior royals after the King said he shared his cancer diagnosis to prevent speculation.
I would say it's definitely good that they're being more transparent. I think it's kind of bringing the monarchy into a new age.
I think it will lead to, more people getting checked.
We're live at Buckingham Palace with the latest throughout the show as Harry prepares to head to the UK and his father undergoes treatment. The palace says he's wholly positive. A new sighting and a man arrested on suspicion of hiding the Clapham chemical attack suspect. We'll have the very latest. A Sky News investigation uncovers how mentally unwell prisoners waiting for a hospital transfer are taking matters into their own hands.
When you're psychotic and depressed, being locked away in a cell is one of the worst things you can do to someone because you have access to things you can self-harm with. You have access to razor blades.
Captain Tom's spa demolition, we look through the latest images of its demise, including this giant jacuzzi being winched off the site. And don't miss our big debate in half an hour about the morning after pill. Should it be sold prescription-free from the shop shelf? Morning, everybody. Our top story for you this morning is about the shock announcement that the King has cancer. Prince William is expected to take on some extra public duties alongside other senior royals, including the Queen, as his father undergoes treatment. While the palace did not name the type of cancer, they say the King remains wholly positive about his treatment. The King said he chose to share the very private news to stop speculation. Matthew Thompson reports.
As the King made his way to church at Sandringham on Sunday, it was just another day in the royal routine. What was to follow was anything but. He would shortly make his way back to London to start treatment for cancer. It's just over a week since the King left hospital following surgery for an enlarged prostate. But we're told it's not prostate cancer.
How are you feeling?
We now know it was here that his cancer was discovered. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, during the King's recent hospital procedure for benign prostate enlargement, a separate issue of concern was noted. Subsequent diagnostic tests have identified a form of cancer. His Majesty has chosen to share his diagnosis to prevent speculation and in the hope it may assist public understanding for all those around the world who are affected by cancer. And outside the palace, the public agreed.
If he's doing this as a king, as a leader, I think it will lead to, more people getting checked.
It's definitely good that they're being more transparent. I think it's kind of bringing the monarchy into a new age. I think given how private everything was before.
To go public with such a private matter is unusual by recent royal standards, to say the least. But there's hope in the announcement that it may have been caught early.
It's a good job that this has been detected. I mean, the name of the game with any form of cancer is early detection and early treatment. And the earlier you pick things up, the more likely the treatment is to be completely curative.
The King shared the news personally with his 3 siblings and both sons. Prince Harry, who's not been in the UK since his court appearance in June, will travel here in the coming days. No time frame has been given for the 75-year-old monarch's treatment, and doctors have advised he postpone his public duties. But he remains king and will carry on working behind the scenes on matters of state. Prince William will return to work this week after taking time to support his wife after her abdominal surgery. He, along with other members of the family, like the Princess Royal and the Queen, will be the key royals expected to hold the fort in public. The Queen will continue with her official duties. Just last week, she opened a cancer centre. Sharing such personal information is a change of tack for the royal family, who perhaps be hoping that going public with the King's diagnosis will mean he can now recover much more privately. Matthew Thompson, Sky News.
Let's bring in Rhiannon, should we? She's standing by for us at Buckingham Palace this morning. Hello to you, Rhiannon. Goodness, what a shock reverberating around the world.
Yeah, I think we saw him on Sunday, didn't we, at Sandringham? And my first thought was, gosh, doesn't he look well after having that prostate procedure? But then, of course, last night at 6 o'clock, we had this news that I think most of us weren't expecting. Speaking to people within the palace, the one word that keeps being repeated over and over again is they're trying to stay positive, and they point to the fact that on Sunday he was smiling and waving, and they insist that that wasn't the king putting it on. He is trying to keep as upbeat as he possibly can. But of course, for any family, it's deeply upsetting and worrying when any family member is diagnosed with cancer. And of course, coupled with that, you have the most famous family in the world having to decide how exactly they share that news globally, knowing that people are going to talk about it very widely and that the speculation is inevitably going to build. I think they wanted to try and keep control of how they imparted this news as much as possible, knowing that the likes of social media can be rife with all kinds of different rumours. And I think now that's what they're potentially going to battle with. As other members of the royal family are inevitably going to pick up the slack, we're going to see the Queen out and about more. We know that Prince William is going to be back at work this week after, of course, taking some time off because the Princess of Wales has been unwell. But also speaking to people at the palace, I think what they want to try and potentially do is show us ways that the King is continuing to work. In a way, they realise that shutting him away, us not seeing him for weeks, potentially months, is just going to build that speculation. But also you have a man who is a known workaholic. Queen Camilla regularly talks about the fact that he works too hard, and I think he will want to show that he is continuing with that official business, even though the doctors are advising that it's best not to be seen amongst big crowds of members of the public.
OK, thank you. Well, earlier I spoke to consultant urologist Dr Rajiv Nair. I asked him how doctors were able to detect the King's cancer.
It can be through his preoperative blood tests or preoperative imaging tests that a tumour may have been identified at the time and then action needed to be taken after his prostate surgery. It may have been during the prostate surgery that they identified an abnormality. Often the type of prostate surgery the King has had will involve an examination of the inside of the bladder, and that may have picked up a polyp or a tumour within it.
Ashish is here with us. We don't know what sort of cancer it is as yet. Buckingham Palace have chosen not to tell us.
Yes, they're keeping the type of cancer and how advanced the cancer is private, and they're entitled to do that. The King is a patient. All patients are entitled to privacy, especially whilst undergoing such sensitive treatment. They have told us that he has begun treatment as an outpatient. So that will tell doctors that this cancer was picked up during an elective procedure. So it's because the King would have been asymptomatic. He hasn't presented with any issues which required investigation. This has been picked up. The analysis, the diagnosis has been carried out. Next, it's what stage is the cancer, how far removed is it from the actual organ which is infected in the first place with those cancerous cells, and also how fit is the patient, how fit is he. There will be an assessment to decide what sort of treatment goes forward. So there will be the therapies like chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and of course there is always a possibility of a surgical intervention. If it's a localised, smaller cancer, then that might happen quite soon. But it also shows, and this is great, that the palace has decided to share the King's news, because there will be thousands and thousands of patients on the elective register whose cancers are being missed. The King was very fortunate. He went in for an elective procedure and this cancer was picked up. And so that will really put some focus on that elective waiting list. People whose cancers are developing will be picked up by these procedures. Let's have a look at the number of people in this country who are diagnosed with cancer. The King's diagnosis is far from unusual. Some 1 in 2 people will develop some sort of cancer in their lifetime. Survival rates in the UK have doubled to 50% over the past 5 decades. Every year in the UK, there are some 375,000 new cases of cancer, and that amounts to about 1,000 cases every day. So all of us I think, sadly, will know somebody who has been impacted or affected by cancer. And Buckingham Palace coming out will hope that the announcement has the same sort of impact that the King's announcement about his prostate treatment had. Lots of men going forward to look for treatment.
OK, for now, Ashish, thanks very much. Thank you. Well, coming up at 8:15, joined by Dame Laura Leaf. She's the chief exec of Maggie's. It's a cancer charity that the Queen is president of. And indeed, the Queen opened their latest facility just last week. We'll be talking about that in more detail. And also what's happening with this Clapham suspect. Been on the run now for nearly a week.
Nearly a week, investigations ongoing. We know that police have arrested a man on suspicion of hiding the main suspect. Police have also released new CCTV of the suspect, Abdul Azadi, the day before the attack, buying groceries in Newcastle. On day 6 of the manhunt, our national correspondent Tom Parmenter has the latest.
As he bought his groceries, he seemed chatty and relaxed. 24 hours later, the police believe he attacked a woman and 2 children with alkaline in Clapham, southwest London. The children have now recovered, but their mother is still sedated and has serious facial injuries. In every image of Azadi since the attack, his own facial wound has been very clear. The latest sighting of him was here, near Southwark Bridge in central London, at 9:47 after the attack. Officers have now arrested a 22-year-old man on suspicion of helping him.
Anybody who is harbouring Azadi or is thinking of helping Azadi in some way or another, we will take that very seriously and we will take action. So that man came into custody, he's been interviewed. We're following up a number of lines of inquiry as a consequence of that.
The Met Police do have the suspect's phone, which was left in Clapham. Unpicking his relationship with the victim is a key line of inquiry.
This could go on for a long time. The police will be very, very keen to try and resolve this as quickly as possible. But the longer it goes on, the more of a political story it will be around how the Home Office manages asylum seekers.
£20,000 is still on offer for information that leads to Azadi's arrest. The search is focused on his movements in London and also his life here in Newcastle. But in Manchester on Saturday night, armed police rushed into Piccadilly station after a possible sighting. It wasn't him, but it shows just how police forces across the country are on high alert. And it will be that way until he's found. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Newcastle.
A British-owned cargo ship has sustained minor damage after being hit by what's described as a projectile while sailing off Yemen's coast. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Agency says no one was injured and the ship carried on. Houthi rebel attacks on shipping are among the issues that are being discussed by the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, as his Middle East trip continues to Egypt today. An American porn star has sparked anger after visiting Iran. That's despite the risks of being detained and sentenced to death. Activists have criticised the decision by Whitney Wright, who filmed herself in Tehran and visited the abandoned US embassy. The 32-year-old has been an advocate for Palestinians during the Israel-Hamas war. Red Bull's F1 team principal Christian Horner will remain in his role while being investigated over allegations of inappropriate behaviour. The 50-year-old, who's married to the former Spice Girl, Geri Halliwell, has denied any wrongdoing. Red Bull says the investigation's being carried out by an external barrister. A new species of pterosaur has been discovered on the Isle of Skye in Scotland. The winged reptile lived between 168 and 166 million years ago. That's during the Middle Jurassic period when dinosaurs roamed the Earth. It's been named Cyptera evanse. Researchers said it was a complete surprise. Most of its close relatives are from China.
Let's talk about a Sky News investigation as it relates to people with mental ill health in prison. Alice is here to tell us more. Morning.
Good morning. Yes, we've been given exclusive access to a major report by His Majesty's Chief Inspector for Prison, which highlights just how long acutely mentally unwell prisoners are waiting to be transferred to hospital. They should be transferred within 28 days. Their report found that that's not happening in 85% of cases, with some prisoners waiting more than a year. And just to be clear, we are talking talking about prisoners who are psychotic, prisoners with paranoid schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, who are acutely unwell. They, of course, become very difficult to manage. They often end up in segregation, very, very difficult for prison officers, many of which have very limited training in mental health. The Chief Inspector said he did come across one man who was so unwell, he was, in effect, attempting to disembowel himself. So really, this is what we're talking about, very acutely unwell prisoners. Some of them are very dangerous, but some of them are simply people who are mentally unwell, and many would argue need greater support. Now, I interviewed Bryony, who was a young woman who had no criminal record at all, and it was when her mother sadly passed away that it triggered a mental health crisis, and she found herself in prison. This is her story, with warning that it does contain reference to self-harm.
They started about 10 years ago, and I saw numerous psychiatrists, but none of them picked up on the fact that I was deeply unwell. I developed a delusion that this local ex-policeman had drugged my food from a Chinese takeaway with tapeworm eggs. It was all in my head, but it was very real to me.
Bryony, not her real name, had undiagnosed bipolar disorder. She was arrested for malicious communication and attempted arson, but instead of going to hospital, she went to prison.
It was the worst experience of my life. I started to self-harm because we were allowed razors in our cell. It was basically a way to cope with my surroundings. When you're psychotic and depressed, being locked away in a cell is one of the worst things you can do to someone. It was just a shocking trajectory, really, from happy student to being locked away.
So that was Bryony's experience there. She was in prison for 6 months before she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital. It's also worth pointing out that self-harm in women's prisons is at record level. So there's the problem of prisoners waiting long periods to be transferred, but there's also the concern about people who've been sent to prison simply because there's nowhere else to go. And I was really shocked to discover that prison continues to be used as what's called as a place of safety, i.e. there are no beds available in the community. Somebody may be arrested during a mental health crisis. They could be arrested whilst they're trying to take their own life. We know of multiple cases where that's happening. And instead of going to hospital, they're ending up in prison, and many people are worried that, in effect, we're criminalising those who are mentally unwell.
OK, for now, Alice, thank you. Well, a government spokesperson has told us this. Providers in prison have clear processes in place to identify, assess and treat offenders with mental health needs. NHS England is investigating in post-custody care to help prison leavers access their community-based health services. Providers in prison have clear processes in place to identify, assess and treat offenders with mental health needs. NHS England is investing in post-custody care to help prison leavers access their community-based health services. And if you or anyone you know has been affected by the issues in that story, you can call the Samaritans number on the screen for you right now, 116 123, 116 123, or you can email joe@samaritans.org. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Prolonged early rain through central parts will clear into the south later, with colder air following. Expect some wintry hazards this week. It's cloudy, mild and windy for most, with rain through central parts, but northern Scotland is frosty with icy stretches. Wales, northern England and the south of Ireland will see rain largely taking over this morning.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Very good morning to Dame Laura Lee, CEO of Maggie's Cancer Charity. It's good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us. Your reaction to the news about the King?
Well, I think probably like everyone, it's shocking when someone who you know, respect, love, value gets that word of a cancer diagnosis. So I think, like all of us, it's you know, you're emotional, you feel deeply you know, rooting for him, and as we all are.
They obviously knew for a little while. They take the opportunity, of course, to tell the family first. But the Queen is your patron, I think?
She's our president, and she's been our president of Maggie's for 15 years.
OK, so difficult for her. She opened a new cancer support centre, just last week?
She did, and she came and did what she always does brilliantly. She's been and visited many of our centres. And on that visit as well, she sat down, as she always does, with some people who've been affected by cancer, who talked to them about their story of their diagnosis, how they were coping with treatment, and the support that they needed to get through it. So she was having that live conversation, if you like, probably while they were thinking about the news that might be coming their way at home.
Tell me about Maggie's.
So Maggie's are places for people to get support, and importantly, their families as well, whilst they're going through a cancer diagnosis, helping navigate the treatment and the impact of the treatment, how to deal with the challenges of work and life, and then also when treatment comes to an end, of what are some of the long-term side effects that can come with a treatment for cancer.
What's your advice to families when they hear the C word? They don't really hear anything else apart from that to start with.
It is still shocking, but I think the advice is that take one's time, and I think we can see that in what the King has done. Is he's been open and transparent about his news. He's not told us everything, but he's giving himself time, and he's giving his family time to adjust to that news, to work through what the treatment options are and what the next days ahead will hold. And by taking time and getting support and talking, you'll find a way through this.
Someone who's diagnosed with cancer, as we've been saying on Morning Every 2 Minutes, that is pretty scary stuff. But most people survive.
Yeah, I mean, cancer is not the death sentence that it used to be. People do survive cancer, and people go on and live very full and productive of lives.
OK, so what's your positive advice for people who, many people watching this morning will get that diagnosis either for themselves or for the family in the coming days and weeks?
So to take one's time, it will be scary to start off with. To get some support, whether or not that's from your clinical team in the hospital, come into a Maggie's, talk to others who are going through it, be inspired by how they've navigated the challenges, and to know that each day at a time you will find your way to get through the treatment and get back to your life from before.
And how do people find out more about Maggie's?
Visit our maggies.org website.
Fantastic. It's good to see you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Bear with me 1 second, if you would, and we'll help you off you just to be on the safe side. It can be a little bit wobbly, that chair. There we go. Thank you. Latest pictures there of Buckingham Palace, and we heard from Buckingham Palace, statement from Buckingham Palace about the King's diagnosis at 6 o'clock last night. Murray is here with us. Murray, hi. We don't know what sort of cancer the King has. We do know that political leaders are very quick to offer their support.
Absolutely, and all over the world, not just in the UK. So we had Joe Biden, President Trump. We've also had Justin Trudeau from Canada, Emmanuel Macron from France. All over the globe, there's been a massive outpouring for the King, but also here at home. So Rishi Sunak yesterday, he tweeted his support, and he said, wishing His Majesty a full and speedy recovery. I have no doubt he'll be back to full strength in no time, and I know the whole country will be wishing him well. Keir Starmer also tweeted something similar, saying on behalf of the Labour Party, he wished all the best for His Majesty's recovery, and we look forward to seeing him back in swift, full health. So a massive outpour from the political world, and we know that King Charles is going to be continuing to maintain his constitutional duties when it comes to his regular meetings with Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak has been speaking to journalists this morning, explaining that he will still be in close and regular contact with the King nonetheless. So when it comes to Parliament, little will change.
In other news, he's the Prime Minister finding himself in hot water this morning by taking £1,000 bet on the same day that the government is putting £300 in people's bank accounts because they can't afford to live otherwise.
Yeah. It's not a good look for the Prime Minister at the moment. I mean, so I've got a quote from the Labour Party. Now, Jonathan Ashworth from the Labour Party has said, Not a lot of people facing rising mortgages, bills, food prices are casually dropping £1,000 bets. It just shows that Rishi Sunak is totally out of touch with working people, and that is the danger with this bet, is it looks like he can afford to just throw £1,000 away like it's nothing, but also the fact that we know people are dying from crossing over to the Channel, and therefore it just, as you pointed out, is slightly crass. It's just the tone is not ideal for the Prime Minister.
No, put it to the Minister, actually. Would you bet 3 times that amount that asylum seekers will find themselves in Rwanda before the next election?
I think you're referring to the Piers Morgan situation. I didn't see it. It's not... Look, I'm not a gambling man, so I'm not going to get involved in whether I would bet or not. I'm not a betting person. But I think what the Prime Minister was very clear about is that we have to get... We have to get those votes down.
Television presenter, £1,000.
Yeah.
I mean, crass, surely.
Well, as I say, I haven't seen it, so I don't know exactly how it unravelled at the time. Well, it may be these things tend to get into the papers.
It's
but
something that
look,
you wouldn't
the
have
most important, Kate, the really important
Is
thing...
it something you wouldn't have done?
Well, I'm not a gambling person, so I just probably wouldn't have entered into bets on anything, even the Grand National. But look,
is it appropriate that he would...
What is appropriate is, and what people really care about here, is not these kind of sideshows that may occupy newsprint, but is getting the boats down. That's the important thing.
And at the top, when we were talking about 3 times that amount, it's the £300 that they've put into people's bank accounts today who are struggling with the cost of living crisis.
Yes.
We saw the Minister very deftly sidestepping that, but it is embarrassing.
It is embarrassing, and the timing, as you say, of that £300 payment to those who are on the lowest income, those who are struggling the most with rising prices, to then essentially throw three times that away so flippantly on a television programme. Now, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has been speaking to journalists this morning, and he insists that he was taken totally by surprise by the question, by the bet, and essentially said, you know, that's a distraction, that's not important, nothing to see here. What's really the priority is, he said, he was trying to make the point about the Rwanda policy and about stopping the boats and his government's perception and essentially commitment to that. But nonetheless, I don't think people are going to buy that he was taken by surprise. I don't think people will buy that comment.
No, I bet you £1,000 that I can send illegal immigrants to a third-party country. OK, thanks very much. Still to come on the programme for you. Our debate this morning is about the morning after pill. Should it be sold prescription-free from the shelf? With Harry flying in after the King's shock cancer diagnosis, could this be an opportunity to mend family rifts? Speaking to Newsweek's chief royal correspondent, Jack Royston.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance.
It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
We found all the roads to one large cluster of facilities were blocked. Those we did reach were fearsome.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to.
Hey. By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets. I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me. but it's a very strange feeling. Those hills over there, that's Russia.
Is this military ready?
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
Hello again, everybody watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. I'm talking about that shock announcement at 6 o'clock yesterday evening that the King has cancer. It's not prostate cancer. We'll chat about it in more detail in a sec.
We certainly will. After revealing that diagnosis, the palace says the King remains wholly positive, according to the palace, and looks forward to returning to full public duty as soon as possible. The King has begun a schedule of regular treatments and is said to be receiving expert medical care from specialist teams. Investigations of a chemical attack in Clapham last Wednesday have continued, and police have arrested a man on suspicion of hiding the main suspect. Officers have also released new CCTV of the suspect, Abdul Azedi, the day before the attack, buying groceries in Newcastle. And a Sky News investigation has uncovered how mentally unwell prisoners waiting for a hospital transfer are taking matters into their own hands. A digger has torn down parts of an unauthorised building at the home of the fundraising hero, Captain Tom's daughter. A crane lifted the spa pool from the grounds last week in preparation for the demolition. Hannah Ingram Moore and her husband Colin lost an appeal to keep the Captain Tom Moore Foundation building at their home last October.
Every time I look at that picture, it makes me so sad when I'm thinking about Captain Tom and his legacy. Let's talk about the King. He's 75. We heard last night that he has prostate cancer. Forgive me. We heard last night that he has cancer. Everybody thought potentially it was prostate cancer because he had had prostate treatment, but it is not prostate cancer.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't know what kind of cancer it is. We are not speculating on that. But nonetheless, it really marks an amazing shift from what we've seen from previous royals when it comes to the kind of secrecy and privacy around health to this really open admittance of the diagnosis. And in the statement from the palace, one of the things they mentioned was the fact that the King wanted to raise awareness and make sure that other people across the world with cancer knew that he was also, you know, one of them, as it were. And actually, I think it really does humanise the royal family and make us all remember that they are people just like us and they can still, unfortunately, get sick.
I worked on his estate. I lived at the back of Highgrove as well. Have had various interactions with him over the years. He was always so engaging, always trying to help people. You would get phone calls from his private secretary 3 weeks after the last time you had a conversation because he'd had a thought. And so, whilst it may be new for the monarch to be so open and engaged and personal with these kind of things, for Prince Charles, it's many respects, or King Charles, in many respects, it's business as usual from him, from his perspective as an individual.
OK. Just looking at some of the stats when it comes to... I'll put my glasses on. When it comes to cancer, particularly men's cancer, prostate is the most common in men. Then lung, bowel and bladder cancer. This is over 75s. As you get older, you are more likely to contract some form of cancer, which is why cancer diagnoses are increasing, although the death from a cancer is decreasing because we're an ageing population. That's going to be a big problem for the NHS.
Huge problem for the NHS when it comes to the public purse, when it comes to social care, when it comes to state pension. All these things are massively expensive and are putting huge amounts of pressure on government departmental budgets. And that is a really big problem. That is going to be a problem for not just this government, not just the next government, for successive governments to come for the next few decades, realistically. Yeah. Interestingly, earlier this morning on BBC5 Live, the Prime Minister talked about how that he said the cancer that the King had been diagnosed with had been caught early. He said it had been caught early, very thankfully, and he also maintained that he was going to keep his regular audiences with the King and that he would be in regular contact with the King, and that was going to not change. He said, essentially, we're going to crack on with things. He also didn't want to be drawn on whether those audiences might be face-to-face, might be video call. He wouldn't get into the details of that, but he insisted that those meetings, nonetheless, would go ahead as usual.
We don't have a grab. Oh, OK. I thought
we were all waiting for it.
Yeah, well, we all thought
there was a grab. Thought it was coming.
Yeah, we did. We will be hearing, I'm sure, from the Prime Minister in his own words later on in the day. Meantime, Alistair Bruce, let's hear from him in his own words right now. He's outside Buckingham Palace for us. Hi, Alistair, good morning. The King has been open and now more opaque about his health.
Well, the King has made sure through the announcement yesterday that we are aware of the situation he now faces. And for anybody with cancer, it is a very private issue. And I think for the King, as head of state here and of many other countries and head of the Commonwealth, there's a huge amount of interest in how he is. We watched his coronation only last year. It's an early stage in his reign, one in which he has had so much he's wanted to do. So I think the opaqueness is probably because, you know, in these early stages, there's much also for the individual to find out. And I expect in due course we'll be told what we need to know. But for the moment, we just know he's taking his treatment and keeping relatively quiet.
He is 75 years old, but he is in good health. I've heard you talking about how he likes that long stride out. He rarely eats lunch, and he properly looks after himself.
He is extremely firm on himself. The discipline with which he approaches every day is clear to anybody who watches him at work, and he likes to be very fit. When we saw him last at Sandringham going to church, which was only a couple of days ago, he was striding across the garden and into the churchyard. And to everyone watching, I think there was a great sense that this was a king recovering well from the process that he'd had to go through only 10 days before or thereabouts. But now this shock discovery that he has cancer, you know, the word itself does send shudders to most people. And all of us know great friends or members of our family who have either faced it, dealt with it, or been taken by it. And so it is a very serious matter, and they're keen to keep the King going.
OK, for now, thank you. Let's talk now about the morning after pill. Should it be available over the counter, not just in a pharmacy, but in other areas as well? Dr. Sonia is with us, our regular contributor. It's always good to see you, as well as Georgia Gill-Holley, a freelance journalist. Ladies, you go first.
Yeah, I think we should be making it more available. You know, I think having contraception's great. That being able to have sex without fear of pregnancy is really good. And we need to be making it as easy as possible for women to access contraception at a time and place which suits them. And particularly with emergency contraception, it's really important that you're getting it as soon as possible. So I think any initiatives that make it easier for women to access it is really important. I think we need to go further. I think emergency contraception should be free. So right now, some pharmacies are charging women £25 to £35 for one contraceptive pill, which is just, you know, extortionate. And we need to be making sure that women have access to all different types of forms of contraception that they want, which we know is not happening right now in this country. So any move to improve access is really, really welcome.
Georgia?
I think primarily I'm concerned about expanding access at the expense of kind of reducing safeguards. Of course, if you're over 16, you still have to have a doctor's appointment to get the morning after pill. However, if this kind of reform were to come into place, you'd be able to sort of go and buy it, you know, like you would paracetamol or ibuprofen in any shop. And I think that, you know, the morning after pill, emergency contraception it doesn't necessarily work well with everyone's body, with everyone's health conditions or other medications they might be using. That's one of my concerns. And I think also with particularly vulnerable people, whether they're younger, whether they're older, they might be in an abusive relationship, etc., victim of human trafficking, I think it's better to have a situation where you have a pharmacist or a doctor checking why they might be accessing the morning after pill, why they might be accessing it so regularly, so that if there are safeguarding issues, it's a lot easier to flag it. I know there are issues with cost. I totally agree with you that that's not acceptable. I think the issue is that you need to kind of solve that rather than sort of trying to skip over issues to do with waiting lists and costs when you're not actually solving the issue in terms of also a postcode lottery, I think, in terms of access.
Yeah, so I think, you know, the emergency contraceptive pill is a very, very safe medication. There are very few side effects that you get, and actually, to be honest, no sort of real serious side effects that you get from the emergency contraceptive pill. There are other medication that you can get off the shelf that has more side effects. So it's a medication that's widely used and very safe. About safeguarding, I understand your concerns about that. But to be honest, if you're someone that wants emergency contraception right now, you can get it. You can go online to an online pharmacy and you will be able to get it, even if you're underage. And I think the counter to that is, let's say you are like a 15-year-old girl who's had consensual sex with a partner, the condom broke, wants contraception, doesn't want to become pregnant, but then feels too nervous to go to the pharmacy and have to have that conversation in the pharmacist. If they then don't get the contraception that they want and end up having an unwanted pregnancy or having to go through an abortion, then that is, you know, I think more harmful to that woman. You know, and we do have a problem in this country that, you know, 45% of pregnancies are unplanned. We know that the number of women seeking termination of their pregnancy is increasing. It's now at record highs. So we need to be thinking about how we make sure that women have access to the contraception that they need to prevent pregnancies that they don't want.
Georgia. I think my issue is, I totally agree with you that say if you're younger, you might be embarrassed. We know already that at the moment, if you're under 16, you do have to officially go through a doctor, or a gum clinic, that sort of situation. So you do have to talk to someone anyway. I think that I totally understand why, especially, you know, younger girls, they might be embarrassed or nervous. But I think you need to have these systems in place to try and make sure that abuses, and even if it's obviously rarer instances of people being abused, that it is flagged. So I think that, you know, the world is full of systems that kind of we feel we might not need because we're sort of okay and we don't have, you know, any kind of issues at home or anything like that. But I think we need to have these bigger systems in place. So when there are rarer cases, though unfortunately it's not rare, I mean, lots of people are in abusive relationships, unfortunately, that kind of thing. London, for example, is a huge human trafficking, sex trafficking hub in Europe. I think you need to have those systems in place so that they are flagged, whether or not, you know, you or I might feel comfortable going to the doctors or going wherever.
Yeah, I agree, but I think that shouldn't be. I think there's a balance here of risk and benefits, and you know, if we make it more difficult for women to access contraception, then that means more unplanned pregnancies, which I don't think is the right thing to do. And we know from surveys that have been done by women that they're finding it difficult to get the contraception that they need. And right now, the current situation where you have to go to a doctor or a pharmacist to get that contraception, we know that's difficult. You know, it's really hard to get a GP appointment. And pharmacists, for example, on evenings, on weekends, on bank holidays, are not open. And with emergency contraception, the quicker you take it, the more effective it is. So if we're putting in that extra barrier for women to get the contraception that they need, then they're more at risk of having a pregnancy that they don't want.
Okay, final thought, Georgia. I also think, in general, I totally agree with you that it's people's choice to get that and they might feel really pressured or in emergency circumstances to get it. However, I think also the pill in general, there's a lot of younger people kind of turning against it because they think that the hormonal drawbacks are sort of worse than the benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we need to be giving women full information and trust women to make the right decision for them.
Sadly, ladies, we're out of time. That was a fascinating debate. Thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Thank you. US Secretary of State's latest Middle East tour has moved to Cairo this morning. Antony Blinken is pushing for a hostage deal and to try to dampen regional tensions after American airstrikes in Syria, in Iraq and also in Yemen. Let's get more, should we? Our international correspondent John Sparks is in the northern Iraqi city of Erbil for us this morning. So his travel around the Middle East continues.
Good morning, Kay. Certainly does. He is a very busy man. He was in Saudi Arabia yesterday, Egypt today. He's got a couple of other stops to make on his tour, and you know, he's basically trying to put a lid on all of this tit-for-tat violence, these tit-for-tat attacks that we've seen around the region. And to do that, he's probably got to make some progress on the situation in Gaza as well. There are proposals for a ceasefire out there. Can he turn that into a deal? He needs to discuss the humanitarian situation in Gaza as well, which is dire. I can tell you that causes a lot of passion around the region, and he knows that people need to start talking about what happens to the Strip once the Israelis withdraw. So, you know, he's got a whole lot on his agenda to do and to talk about. You know, it's been fairly quiet, though, over the last couple of hours in the region after a tumultuous couple of days. I can tell you that a British-owned cargo ship was fired at off the coast of Yemen. The crew there took evasive action. They got away unscathed, but it just goes to show that the Houthi militia, for one, show absolutely no sign of laying down their arms.
OK, for now, thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News, with Harry flying in after the King's shock cancer diagnosis. Could this be an opportunity to mend family rifts? Speaking to Newsweek's chief royal correspondent, that's Jack Royston, next.
Well, the idea of the movie starts from the desire to give finally visual form to a part of the journey that we usually don't see, because we are used to see only the last part, when the boat arriving in Sicily, when they succeed to arrive, and the ritual count of the people alive and dead. And we don't know anything about the journey. We don't know anything about what they passed through. So we decide to make a sort of reverse shot. We put the camera on the other side, not from our point of view, and we try to give to the audience that will see the movie the possibility to live an experience, to live the experience of the journey from the point of view of the main actor. That's the idea that brings us. So to make this movie, I work with the person that for real live this epic journey, because they are the carriers of the contemporary epic. So I wrote the script with them. Mamadou is just beside me. And then on the set, on the image that you saw in the movie, all the extra, they were real migrants. So they could help us to recreate the adventure, because they call adventure.
I was lucky to survive, and I call myself lucky survivor. After seeing this kind of life that we passed through, I think this trauma too, we were able to explain this part of our life, because most of the time people only see people just arriving in Europe by boat, but before we arrive in Europe, they do not see what we face really in our life. And even in desert, you can see that people, children, women are dying.
In Italy has been released in September, and after a week, the Pope, Francis the Pope, wanted to screen the movie in Vatican.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he supported the movie from the beginning.
Chatting to Jack Royston in just a second or two. You don't call, you don't write, the flowers have stopped. Thankfully, you're back.
Thankfully, indeed. Thank you for having me back.
We'll see you in a second. Meantime, Wilfred is standing by for us. Pleased to see him every single day. Wilfred, obviously, we're going to be talking about the King and that shock news yesterday, 6 p.m.
Absolutely, and I think it did take us all by shock. I'm sure it took his family members even more by shock, and I thought that detail they released that he told his sons and his siblings directly was an interesting bit of depth to what we've been told thus far. And as we said earlier, you hear the C word, the cancer word, and it takes you by shock even when he's a distance from all of us, as albeit our head of state. The other thing I would just say that jumps out to me as well is the role for Prince of Wales and Prince William, how he's stepping up. That statement that was released just a couple of hours before, that he'd be going back to full duties much sooner than we'd expected, given his own wife's health problems, just showing that the family wants to show that the show's going on, and to learn that your father's got cancer but also have to go back to work whilst your wife's unwell is quite a sign of the commitment, I think, throughout the family, trying to pick up the slack here.
Indeed so, and in fact I think the Prince of Wales is carrying out an investiture at Windsor tomorrow. He's got other air ambulance duties as well later on in the day. He's already straight back in to work when we, as you were saying, we're not expecting that to happen potentially straight away. I don't know if that's giving us an insight into how poorly or otherwise the King is.
I think, I think on top of that, it shows that they want to keep things going. I will just say that with all of it, it adds to the tinge of sadness on the news from the King, because don't forget, whether it was 8 or 9 days ago when the King left hospital, or late last week when the Princess of Wales left hospital, we kind of all felt, OK, they've had these, let's say, minor ailments and they've come through them. There was a sort of a real contradiction in the news that came out yesterday, having thought that the temporary worst was behind us. But look, I'm sure it's weighing hugely heavily on Prince William's shoulders, and indeed on Prince Harry's. Tough moments can be moments that bring family members together.
Well, let's see. For now, thanks very much indeed. We'll see more of at 10 o'clock this morning. Jack, bringing families together?
Absolutely, 100%. It was only a couple of years ago that Prince Harry was asked on NBC whether he missed his father and brother, and he swerved the question and he said his home was in America and the family he missed was his 2 children. Well, fast forward to today, and he's clearly absolutely dropped everything and got straight onto his staff without any hesitation to get booked to come to Britain.
What are we reading into that?
He's taking this very seriously, I think, and he also is, I would imagine he has had a very sobering moment. I think he'll probably have been reminded of 1997 when he lost his mother, and Charles was the man who told him that. Now, this is not me saying we should be pessimistic about the King's outlook at all. He's optimistic and we should take his lead there.
Yeah.
But it would be inhuman not to be reminded of that incredibly traumatic and tragic moment for Harry. I think one thing that's going to be interesting is whether this brings Harry and William together. I think
that was going to be my next question, because that is a fissure that is a chasm, really.
It's way, way harder to bridge. I think Harry and Charles have actually already bridged their rift a little bit. They had a call at the time of Charles's birthday in November, and I think Charles has always just wanted all the toxicity and negativity to go away and to return to good relations, whereas I think William is much more actively angry with Harry. And doesn't really want to have anything to do with him anymore. But he, too, will no doubt have been reminded of 1997, and that was a moment that him and Harry went through together. So he might well have also been given pause for thought. One thing that's interesting with Harry is he was criticised for not going to Balmoral to spend the summer with the royals back in 2022. And then, obviously, we lost the Queen a month later. He is taking absolutely no chances this time, and clearly, Meghan is supporting him in doing it.
Indeed. So, I mean, it's horrible to be reminded of our parents' own mortality, but that's exactly what has happened. But as you said, the prognosis, as far as the King is concerned, via Buckingham Palace, is that he's good, he's in good spirits. I wonder why he was so open to start with. He's telling us about his enlarged prostate, and Google's head exploded when everybody was looking at what enlarged prostate meant. Then he tells us that he has cancer, but then becomes quite opaque about what that cancer is.
I think he had a known quantity when he was telling us about his prostate diagnosis. He decided that he wanted to be candid and open because he wanted to encourage other people to go and get checked out. I think this diagnosis will have knocked him for six. No matter how positive and optimistic he's feeling, it's impossible not to be completely shaken by the C word. Nobody wants to hear that word. That original level of candour was a big departure from the royal norm. So, I mean, I actually think he is still sharing more than we'd perhaps normally expect from the palace. You know, at the time that the Queen was unwell, we got very little information. So I think he is actually being more open than
Is that because he's a sharer, or is that because that's what we are expecting from a modern royal family?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that he works, you know, he's worked with cancer charities, he's worked in this area. I think he does understand that there is also a need to try to reassure people, and hiding stuff is not very reassuring. It makes it look like they're panicking, and that if they look like they're sweeping stuff under the carpet, it also creates a vacuum in which people start to wildly speculate.
He's going to be out of action for some time, exactly. Whatever we're hearing now. You know, I have experience with my own family that it takes a long time to recover from cancer. It's good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. But you do recover from cancer. Have a look at this flying jacuzzi. Who does this belong to? Well, let me tell you. It is the centrepiece of that spa that was built by Captain Tom's daughter and son-in-law, and the council are not having it.
They certainly aren't. It was originally going to be built for the Captain Tom Foundation, wasn't it? And then during that planning process, the family kind of changed the wording slightly. Captain Tom's family, his daughter Hannah and her husband Colin, and it was then said that this spa pool was going to be used for private use. And the council said, absolutely not.
I don't think so, they said. Yeah. And you need to knock it down by the
7th of February. So very, very soon, and that's what they're doing now.
Tomorrow.
Scrapping it all down.
In fact. So,
I've lost track.
Well, you've only just come back, haven't you, from a fantastic honeymoon? Did you have a lovely time?
I did.
Excellent. Well, this is what you missed while you were away. That building being absolutely brought down brick by brick. Should we have another quick look? There we go. And that digger in the middle. Is there something faintly satisfying about seeing buildings being demolished?
I love demolishing buildings.
Me too.
It's very cathartic.
See, now I'm the opposite. It's going to sound really, you know, new of me, but like I worry about the waste, all of that waste, and where's it all going to be
recycled?
Is it going to be recycled?
Well, they're not throwing that spa pool away, are they?
All that scrap.
You're going to put it in the sitting room.
All right,
maybe not. We are back with all today's top stories coming up in just a few moments' time here on Sky News Breakfast Show Tuesday morning. Do stay tuned our way. Morning, 9 o'clock. Coming up on today's programme, we're going to be talking about that shock diagnosis of the King's cancer. We'll be speaking to the King's former press secretary.
We've also spoken to one cancer specialist who had some interesting thoughts about the King's condition. We'll bring you that shortly.
We will.
Plus, we're talking all about that Clapham attack at 9:30 with a survivalist from Hunted.
There we are. Tuesday, the 6th of February. Prince William expected to hold the fort and take on extra public duties along with other senior royals after the King said he shared his cancer diagnosis to prevent speculation.
I would say it's definitely good that they're being more transparent. I think it's kind of bringing the monarchy into a new age.
I think it will lead to, more people getting checked.
Live at Buckingham Palace with the latest through the breakfast show as Prince Harry prepares to head to the UK and his father undergoes treatment. The palace says he is wholly positive. A new sighting and a man arrested on suspicion of hiding the Clapham chemical attack suspect. We'll have the very latest. A Sky News investigation uncovers how mentally unwell prisoners waiting for a hospital transfer are taking matters into their own hands.
When you're psychotic and depressed, being locked away in a cell is one of the worst things you can do to someone because you have access to things you can self-harm with. You have access to razor blades.
Captain Tom's spa demolition. We look through the latest images of its demise, including this giant jacuzzi being winched off the site. Also this morning, I've pressed the Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride about criticism of Rishi Sunak for making a TV bet about whether asylum flights will take off for Rwanda.
Would you bet 3 times that amount that asylum seekers will find themselves in Rwanda before the next election?
I think you're referring to the Piers Morgan situation. I didn't see it. It's not... I'm not a gambling man.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us here on The Breakfast Show. Our top story this morning is about the shock news that the King has cancer. Prince William is expected to take on some extra public duties alongside other senior royals, including the Queen, as his father undergoes treatment. While the palace did not name the type of cancer, they say the King remains wholly positive about his treatment. The King said he chose to share the very private news to stop speculation. Matthew Thompson reports.
As the King made his way to church at Sandringham on Sunday, it was just another day in the royal routine. What was to follow was anything but. He would shortly make his way back to London to start treatment for cancer. It's just over a week since the King left hospital following surgery for an enlarged prostate. But we're told it's not prostate cancer.
How are you feeling?
We now know it was here that his cancer was discovered. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, during the King's recent hospital procedure for benign prostate enlargement, a separate issue of concern was noted. Subsequent diagnostic tests have identified a form of cancer. His Majesty has chosen to share his diagnosis to prevent speculation and in the hope it may assist public understanding for all those around the world who are affected by cancer. And outside the palace, the public agreed.
If he's doing this as a king, as a leader, I think it will lead to, more people getting checked.
It's definitely good that they're being more transparent. I think it's kind of bringing the monarchy into a new age. I think given how private everything was before.
To go public with such a private matter is unusual by recent royal standards, to say the least. But there's hope in the announcement that it may have been caught early.
It's a good job that this has been detected. I mean, the name of the game with any form of cancer is early detection and early treatment. And the earlier you pick things up, the more likely the treatment is to be completely curative.
The King shared the news personally with his 3 siblings and both sons. Prince Harry, who's not been in the UK since his court appearance in June, will travel here in the coming days. No time frame has been given for the 75-year-old monarch's treatment, and doctors have advised he postpone his public duties. But he remains king and will carry on working behind the scenes on matters of state. Prince William will return to work this week after taking time to support his wife after her abdominal surgery. He, along with other members of the family, like the Princess Royal and the Queen, will be the key royals expected to hold the fort in public. The Queen will continue with her official duties. Just last week, she opened a cancer centre. Sharing such personal information is a change of tack for the royal family, who perhaps be hoping that going public with the King's diagnosis will mean he can now recover much more privately. Matthew Thompson, Sky News.
Standing by for us at Buckingham Palace this morning. Hi, Rhiannon, good morning. What more do we know?
So I've just seen the King's Communications Secretary and been told that there will be no updates today, and that's not surprising after the announcement that we had yesterday, which made it very clear that they are not going to give that cliche, a running commentary of his treatment and how he's doing. But I think the one thing they are really keen to stress is that they are, as much as possible, trying to stay positive. They've pointed to the pictures that we saw of the King at Sandringham on Sunday, the fact that he was smiling and waving. They say that wasn't put on. He is trying to stay as upbeat as he possibly can. But of course, for any patient, for any family, a cancer diagnosis is undoubtedly worrying. It is upsetting. And of course, being the most famous family in the world, they also had that very difficult decision of exactly how they wanted to share that news with the rest of the world. Of course, I think they wanted to take ownership as much as possible. They've said very clearly they wanted to share those little bits of information. We, of course, don't know what kind of cancer it is, but they wanted to share a little bit to try and stop some kind of speculation. But I think what we're now going to see is other members of the royal family, of course, having to pick up the slack in a way. We're going to see much more of the Princess Royal. I think she's going to be particularly busy today. The Queen also is going to be out and about again. At some point, she's going to be picking up more engagements. And of course, Prince William as well. He took some time out because the Princess of Wales was unwell, but he is going to do some engagements this week. It's also been made clear to me that the fact that they're telling the King not to do those public-facing engagements isn't necessarily a reflection of the fact that they think he's going to be too unwell to do it because of his treatment, but more a fact that doctors are being very cautious, making sure that he doesn't pick up other kinds of infections. But I think what's going to be difficult is this is a man who is known to be a workaholic and wants to be seen to continue that work as monarch.
OK, for now, thank you. Well, earlier, I spoke to a consultant urologist, that's Dr. Rajiv Nair. I asked him how doctors were able to detect the King's cancer.
It can be through his preoperative blood tests or preoperative imaging tests that a tumour may have been identified at the time and then action needed to be taken after his prostate surgery. It may have been during the prostate surgery that they identified an abnormality. Often the type of prostate surgery the King has had will involve an examination of the inside of the bladder, and that may have picked up a polyp or a tumour within it.
Well, Ashish is here with us this morning. We don't know what sort of cancer it is, but we do know the King is stepping back from some of his royal duties and he is undergoing treatment right now.
And we do know that it's not prostate cancer. That's as much as Buckingham Palace are telling us. And that's right and that's important. He is a patient as well as being the monarch. He's entitled to his privacy. And they've made this statement in the hope that it encourages more people to take a look at their own health, come forward, step forward, go to any sort of screening invitations they've been asked to go along to. So that's important. Then there is a public health message in all of this. And what's also very important, Kay, is that the King's cancer was detected during an elective procedure. There are thousands of people, millions of people waiting for an elective procedure, many of whom will be missing out on potentially life-saving cancer diagnosis. And we know survival rates are much, much better when the cancer is identified early. Treatment is undertaken much earlier. What will happen now is they've identified the cancer. We don't know how far it's spread, so we don't know what stage the cancer is. And we do know that the therapies that the King will receive have begun already. There might be some sort of surgical intervention, but that will be assessed later on, depending on the severity of the cancer. But cancer is common, sadly, in this country. We all know somebody who's been affected by the disease. Let me just go through some of the numbers of people affected by cancer in this country. The King's diagnosis is far from unusual. 1 in 2 people will develop some sort of cancer in their lifetime. Survival rates in the UK have doubled to 50% over the past 5 decades. Every year, in the UK, there are some 375,000 new cases of cancer. And that amounts to about 1,000 cases every day. So when I speak to cancer experts, Kay, they tell me one very important thing. Treatment should be maximum effectiveness for the cancer, minimum invasiveness for the patient.
Oh, OK. We wish him well, don't we? Thanks very much indeed.
And his family.
And indeed so, exactly that. What else have we got today?
Plenty of other news to bring you this morning. Let's start with the investigators of the chemical attack in Clapham, who took place last Wednesday. They've arrested a man on suspicion of hiding the main suspect. Police have also released new CCTV of the suspect, Abdul Azadi, the day before the attack, buying groceries in Newcastle. On day 6 of the manhunt, our national correspondent Tom Parmenter has the latest.
As he bought his groceries, he seemed chatty and relaxed. 24 hours later, the police believe he attacked a woman and 2 children with alkaline in Clapham, southwest London. The children have now recovered, but their mother is still sedated and has serious facial injuries. In every image of Azadi since the attack, his own facial wound has been very clear. The latest sighting of him was here, near Southwark Bridge in central London, at 9:47 after the attack. Officers have now arrested a 22-year-old man on suspicion of helping him.
Anybody who is harbouring Azadi or is thinking of helping Azadi in some way or another, we will take that very seriously and we will take action. So that man came into custody, he's been interviewed. We're following up a number of lines of inquiry as a consequence of that.
The Met Police do have the suspect's phone, which was left in Clapham. Unpicking his relationship with the victim is a key line of inquiry.
This could go on for a long time. The police will be very, very keen to try and resolve this as quickly as possible. But the longer it goes on, the more of a political story it will be around how the Home Office manages asylum seekers.
£20,000 is still on offer for information that leads to Azadi's arrest. The search is focused on his movements in London and also his life here in Newcastle. But in Manchester on Saturday night, armed police rushed into Piccadilly station after a possible sighting. It wasn't him, but it shows just how police forces across the country are on high alert. And it will be that way until he's found. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Newcastle.
A British-owned cargo ship has sustained minor damage after being hit by what's described as a projectile while sailing off Yemen's coast. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Agency says no one was injured and the ship carried on. Houthi rebel attacks on shipping are among the issues being discussed by the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, as his Middle East trip continues to Egypt today. An American porn star has sparked anger after visiting Iran. That's despite the risks of being detained and sentenced to death. Activists have criticised the decision by Whitney Wright, who filmed herself in Tehran and visited the abandoned US embassy. The 32-year-old has been an advocate for Palestinians during the Israel-Hamas war. A warning now that the next images do contain flash photography. Red Bull's F1's team principal, Christian Horner, will remain in his role while being investigated over allegations of inappropriate behaviour. The 50-year-old, who's married to former Spice Girl Jerry Halliwell, denied any wrongdoing. Red Bull says the investigation's being carried out by an external barrister. A new species of pterosaur has been discovered on the Isle of Skye in Scotland. The winged reptile lived between 168 and 166 million years ago. That's during the Middle Jurassic period when dinosaurs roamed the Earth. It's been named Septera evense. Researchers said it was a complete surprise. Most of its close relatives are from China.
Let's bring you more on a Sky News investigation as it relates to people with mental health challenges in prison. Alice is here. Tell me more.
Yes, that's right. We've been given exclusive access to a major report by His Majesty's Chief Inspector for Prisons, which is highlighting just how long acutely mentally unwell prisoners are waiting to be transferred to hospital. So NHS guidelines stipulate they should be transferred within 28 days. That's not happening in 85% of cases, with one person understood to have waited more than a year. And just to be clear, We are talking about prisoners who have psychosis, who are incredibly unwell with conditions such as schizophrenia. The Chief Inspector highlighted in his report prisoners who are so unwell they are attempting to rip out their own bowels, attempting to rip out their own teeth. Really horrendous detail, and I think it really shows just how unwell some of these prisoners are. Many of them are very dangerous, but many of them have mental conditions and many would argue need support in a psychiatric hospital rather than a prison, where so often they end up in segregation because prison officers simply can't cope with them. Now, I spoke to one woman who we're calling Bryony. She had no criminal record whatsoever. She was a student at university. When her mother sadly passed away, it triggered a mental health crisis and she ended up in prison. Now, this is her story, but it does contain references to self-harm, so we do warn people there.
It started about 10 years ago, and I saw numerous psychiatrists, but none of them picked up on the fact that I was deeply unwell. I developed a delusion that this local ex-policeman had drugged my food from a Chinese takeaway with tapeworm eggs. It was all in my head, but it was very real to me.
Bryony, not her real name, had undiagnosed bipolar disorder. She was arrested for malicious communication and attempted arson, but instead of going to hospital, she went to prison.
It was the worst experience of my life. I started to self-harm because we were allowed razors in our cell. It was basically a way to cope with my surroundings. When you're psychotic and depressed, being locked away in a cell is one of the worst things you can do to someone. It was just a shocking trajectory, really, from happy student to being locked away.
So that's Bryony's experience there. Now, she was in prison for 6 months before she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital. And it's worth pointing out, while it's very upsetting hearing her testimony when it comes to self-harm in women's prisons is at record levels, and it's actually 11 times higher than it is in men's prisons. So there's a concern about how long both male and female prisoners who are unwell are waiting to be transferred to get to prison, but there's also a concern about the way in which prison is being used as what's called as a place of safety, ultimately because there are no beds in the community, so people could be arrested, perhaps when they're trying to take their own life, and then they are being, unfortunately, interred in prison.
For now, thanks very much. Thank you. More about that online. Alice's special investigation. We've got some breaking news to bring you in just a second, but first I want to tell you about a government spokesman on that story, telling us that providers in prison have clear processes in place to identify, assess and treat offenders with mental health needs. NHS England is investing in post-custody care to help prison leavers access their community-based health services. Providers in prison have clear processes in place to identify, assess and treat offenders with mental health needs. NHS England is investing in post-custody care to help prison leavers access their community-based health services. And just a reminder that if you or anyone you know has been affected by the issues in that story, you can call the Samaritans 116 123. There you go, on the screen for you now, 116 123, or email joe@samaritans.org. Now, to that breaking news that I promised you. Kwasi Kwarteng's tweeted.
He has, Kay. Kwasi Kwarteng has tweeted some pretty big news. He is standing down at the next election. Let me read you his tweet. So he says, yesterday I informed my association chair of my decision not to stand at the next general election. It has been an honour to serve the residents of Spelthorne since 2010, and I shall continue to do so for the remainder of my time in Parliament. Now, to remind viewers, Kwasi Kwarteng was Chancellor very briefly under Liz Truss when she was Prime Minister. He was seen as the architect alongside Liz Truss of that disastrous mini-budget that many blame for crashing the economy, especially the Labour Party would blame. Now, Kwasi Kwarteng also has actually a very healthy majority. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's about 18...
I was just looking that up, actually. 18,400.
Yeah. So quite a healthy
70%
majority.
turnout, so they obviously all like him.
Yeah, so it's a great seat to have. Nonetheless, obviously, even MPs on very large majorities are concerned because of the polling we're seeing at the moment. But nonetheless, many would see that as quite a potentially safe seat. But now we know Kwasi Kwarteng is standing down in the next election. It'll be interesting to see if Liz Truss comes out and reacts to this news herself as well. They were seen, before she fired him anyway, as quite close friends
in the same
and
street, don't
allies.
they?
Yeah, they all, I think James Cleverly, Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss all live in a very, very similar area of South East London, down the road from me, actually.
That's why you know so much. Read that tweet to me again.
So I'll read you the tweet from Kwasi Kwarteng. He's tweeted just now saying, yesterday I informed my association chair of my decision not to stand at the next general election. It has been an honour to serve the residents of Spelthorne since 2010 and I shall continue to do so for the remainder of my time in Parliament. The difficulty for Kwasi Kwarteng now is his legacy as an MP really is that mini budget and the impact that it had on the UK economy, and that's not necessarily the best impact to go down with.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Still to come on the breakfast show for you. The King's former Communications Secretary has spoken of how he helped her when she had breast cancer. Christina Kyriakou will be here shortly.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance.
It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
We found all the roads to one large cluster of facilities were blocked. Those we did reach were fearsome.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to.
By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets. I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling. Those hills over there, that's Russia.
Is this military ready?
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
Christina Kyriakou is the former Communications Secretary to King Charles between 2009 and 2016, with us now. This is a challenge to manage, isn't it?
It's a real challenge to manage, but I think Buckingham Palace have done a really, really
good job, you know, of moderating and achieving balance between giving information out but not giving too much information out. Members of the royal family, particularly the monarch, they don't want to become the story and be a perpetual story. So, of course, today's, you know, he's dominant in the news, but he won't want constantly people checking up or trying to see what his condition is or whatever. So I feel a very slick job has been done.
Well, he did tell us about his prostate diagnosis, and he has said that he is suffering from a cancer, not prostate cancer, but has chosen, or Buckingham Palace has chosen not to tell us any more than that. Of course, people will then start to speculate.
Yeah, I think it's, as I say, it's very difficult. The more information you give out, the more speculation you'll fuel. He's got a form of cancer. Actually, do we need to know the detail? Perhaps afterwards, in the fullness of time, when he's patron of Macmillan Cancer Support, perhaps he will choose to speak to people with a similar cancer after and give his experience as enlightenment rather than people being frightened. But at this moment in time, he needs to take care of business as much as he can, focus on his own health and be positive about that, and not have all this wild guessing by giving further information about what exact cancer he's got.
What challenges does this present for the wider family?
I think the main challenges are taking over his very, very packed engagement schedule. But already the Princess Royal is doing an investiture today. I understand then she's hot-footing it up to the Midlands. You can always rely on the Princess Royal and the King to be out there doing the work and supporting one another. So I think William will step up to the plate as well. Of course, he's the new Duke of Cornwall, so his knowledge of the land, he'll be able to take over that side of the engagement portfolio. And then Sophie and Edward will play an active hand wherever they can as well.
Duke of Edinburgh.
Yeah, exactly. And all the young people portfolio, etc.
OK, and we are going to see Harry as well. He is flying in, we believe, from LA today, and he's going to be arriving. I mean, he literally hot-footed it as soon as his father rang him. What do we read anything into that?
Well, I think it's lovely that he's coming over. I don't think anyone needs to rush. I think there's been a real sense of calm from the Buckingham Palace statement of the King is undergoing treatment, he will do state business. There's no need for anyone to rush to his bedside or anything like that. But Harry is his son, and the King will be delighted to see him. And if out of some bad news, some good news can come and there's an overall reconciliation, I think everyone will be happy. So if that's what he wishes to do, wonderful. But I don't think anyone should read anything into that it's sort of, I must get there immediately. It's worse than it is.
And the Queen's role?
I think the Queen will be the wonderful support of the King she is. She will be the person tempering him doing too much. He will absolutely want to sit there going through paperwork, going through the red box, understand he still wants to preside over the Privy Council and the legislative procedure. Thank you, Kay, for helping me out. I put my teeth in back to front this morning. And she will be there. He wants to look after state business. He wants to see the Prime Minister each week. And that feels right in the intense political situation we're in at the moment and the uncertainty around the world. You want him presiding over those really, really key meetings. So that's good to know.
OK, it's good to see you.
Thank you,
Thanks
Kay.
for taking the time.
Always good to see you. Thank you.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. The hunt for chemical attack suspect Abdul Azadi enters a sixth day. With new CCTV video released, we'll speak to a survivalist from Hunted. Hello again, everybody. You're watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News, continuing coverage of the King's diagnosis of cancer.
Yes, and after revealing that cancer diagnosis, the King remains wholly positive, says the palace, and looks forward to returning to full public duty as soon as possible. The King has begun a schedule of regular treatments and is said to be receiving expert medical care from a specialist team. Investigators of a chemical attack in Clapham last Wednesday have arrested a man on suspicion of hiding the main suspect. Police have also released new CCTV of the suspect, Abdul Azadi, the day before the attack, buying groceries in Newcastle. A Sky News investigation has uncovered how mentally unwell prisoners waiting for a hospital transfer are taking matters into their own hands.
Captain Tom, so we've had this conversation in the last hour. There's always something faintly satisfying about knocking buildings down.
Very much so.
Do you remember Fred Dibner?
I loved Fred Dibner.
Do you remember Fred Dibner?
No.
OK, he used to knock down chimney stacks.
OK.
And he used to climb to the top, and sometimes he used to blow them up.
Oh.
Sometimes he used to take them out brick by brick, which is what they've been doing at Captain Tom's gaff.
Fred Dibner would be proud of this kind of work, I can tell you that for a fact. But it's a very sad end, isn't it, to what should have been a remarkable story. And it was when it started, that £38 million for the NHS. I think it's worth also remembering, isn't it, that the money that Captain Tom did raise, that people donated in their millions, did go to the NHS.
Absolutely.
This is a separate part of that story, but just takes the shine off everything that he did.
It does, but I think you are right. We need to remember what Captain Tom did and the fact that that money was put to good use and was a fantastic way to raise awareness and to raise money during the COVID pandemic. We were all locked in our houses watching him doing those laps of his garden and doing his bit for the country. So it is just such a shame. It's that kind of bittersweet flavour, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
It's a shame.
And they had to do it by tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
So there you go.
Yeah.
OK. Thank you. Now, the hunt for a man suspected of a chemical attack in southwest London has entered its 6th day. Police have been investigating the movements of Abdul Shakir Azadi after he allegedly attacked a woman and 2 girls in Clapham last Wednesday. Let's get more, should we? Someone who can tell us more about investigations like this is retired Police Sergeant Mel Thomas. Hi, good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. How difficult is it to find someone who doesn't want to be found?
Morning, everyone. Yeah, it really is difficult because if they just stay where they are and don't raise their head, then you're not going to find them. They could be staying in a house, they could be staying anywhere. It's when they actually raise their head above the surface and actually go out. So as you've seen, we'll know that we've had somebody arrested, suspected of assisting an offender. So that person will need help. They will need support and they will need the basics. They'll need food, they'll need water, and they will need shelter. So hopefully when they're trying to find that, when they're trying to negotiate that, that's when the police will get that lead and that's when they'll be successful in tracking him down. And I think that the time is closing down. That time frame is closing down on him.
OK, because you can hide for, as you said, a finite amount of time, but eventually he will have to move. I suppose the police need to have a rough idea where he might be, though, and he's not going to go home, is he?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we know people are stupid enough to go home, but this isn't a production now. This is somebody that is wanted for a serious offence, and they will try to stay at large for as long as they can. And he obviously is. You know, as we've said, we're into the 6th day. He is avoiding capture, but he is leaving little clues, and that's what the police will be picking up on. But the big thing will be the cooperation of the public. The public supply the police with thousands of sets of CCTV. They are the ones that track the cases more often than not for the police, and that's what they'll really be relying on. And what I would say is to the public out there, don't assist an offender, because if you do, there is a heavy sentence for doing that. If you see the individual, don't approach him. Call it in on the emergency 999 and give as much detail as you can.
OK, good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
US Secretary of State's latest Middle East tour has moved to Cairo this morning. Antony Blinken is pushing for a hostage deal and trying to dampen regional tensions after American airstrikes in Syria, Iraq and Yemen. Let's get more with John Sparks. They're hoping for at least a pause, getting the hostages out and a longer solution. This is what, sixth attempt in the region since the start of the challenges of the 7th of October.
Yep, good morning, Kate. I believe it's his 5th tour in the Middle East since October 7th, the beginning of the fighting, the violence in Gaza and Israel. Boy, I mean, he must carry a heavy briefcase. He has got a whole lot to do. I mean, he's trying to put a lid on this tit-for-tat violence, these tit-for-tat attacks in the region. That's probably step one. Step two, he's got to make some progress on the situation in Gaza as well, because the two are linked. And, you know, for Gaza, there are proposals for a ceasefire around. Can he turn that into a deal? He's got to discuss the humanitarian situation there as well. That is dire, and it causes real heat, real passion in the region. And he knows that people need to start talking about what the Gaza Strip's going to look like when the Israelis withdraw. So, yeah, he has got a whole lot of stuff to do. Otherwise, it's been fairly quiet in the last couple of hours after a really tumultuous couple of days. I can tell you that a British-owned cargo ship was fired at off the coast of Yemen. We understand that the crew took evasive action. No casualties, no injuries there. They seem to have got away unscathed. But it does go to show, doesn't it, that the Houthi militia, for one, show absolutely no signs of laying down their arms, despite the fact that Houthi targets have been pounded by the Americans, by the British for almost a month now.
OK, for now, thank you. The barbarism of the 7th of October never far from the minds of those in the south of Israel, but also the challenges that are facing the people in Gaza. I know you're reflecting on that day by day. Wilfried, on your show, starts at 10 till 11:30, but also looking at what's happening with the King and his diagnosis of cancer today.
Absolutely, Kay. And to your first point and what you're just discussing with John, Professor Michael Clark will be here, so we'll be breaking down all of the significant developments in the Middle East with him at about 20 past 10. But yeah, top of the show, top of the hour, recap on all of the news around the King. Alistair Bruce, Ariana Mills and Ashish Joshua will join us at the top to cover all of those different angles, all of those questions that we're still asking, and some really good guests as well coming up. We've got a consultant oncologist. We've got Robert Hardman, of course, who's just written a book about the King. And it will be the top story, no doubt, throughout the day and quite possibly for weeks to come as we wait for that little bit more of information. I think it's been remarkable how open they have been, fairly quickly as well, because these diagnoses don't reach conclusions immediately. But of course, remains some questions that everyone is still pondering about, and we hope with some less negative answers, let's say. I don't think you get positive answers at this point, but less negative answers than might be possible.
Yeah, challenge. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a royal family, but it is still a family, and it impacts different members of that family in different ways, to the extent where one of the members of the family, who is in a different continent, different time zone, has leapt on a plane and heading back to the UK as quickly as he can to see his dad.
Couldn't agree more. And I think, you know, we discussed this earlier, the word cancer sends a shiver down the spine of anybody when you hear it from a distant relative, let alone obviously of your father or of your sibling. And I do still think we've got to step back and acknowledge that aspect above all else. And if this was any other famous person and they gave us this level of detail, in the immediate aftermath, you would adhere to their wishes, and if they want privacy accepted, in the short term at least. Yes, he's head of state, it changes things a little bit, and there remain some questions and details that everyone wants to know. But he hasn't yet told his son face-to-face about the details, and I'm sure there will be more details to come as and when he's processed all the information alongside his family members.
OK, for now, thanks very much, Will, from 10 o'clock, of course. Much more on the King's health coming up in just a second.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance.
It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
We found all the roads to one large cluster of facilities were blocked. Those we did reach were fearsome.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to.
By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets. I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling. Those hills over there, that's Russia.
Is this military ready?
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
Slightly minutes, slightly better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Bombshell news about Kwasi Kwarteng. Morning.
Good morning. Certainly is. I mean, you couldn't say, Kay, that his career was going to continue being on the up. Look, if the Conservatives go into opposition, and given his role as Chancellor, for which he was sacked by Liz Truss, I think that it's hard to see him playing a big role in the future of the Conservative Party. It is possible to see him getting a job in the city, to be honest.
The economy.
Yes, but, I mean, have you met some of them? They quite like people who can claim experience, claim authority. Like, I think you would go round as a consultant, as somebody who brings knowledge, who can explain how it works. Those skills are valuable. He's a big intellect. You can have lots of opinions about how he did in office, but I think he's still a sellable prospect, down the other end of town.
So what is it saying on the wider issue when people like him and others have said, and I know for a fact others are high-profile people are going to come out quite soon and say, actually, I'm not standing at the next election. What does that say?
Well, it says that lots of people think it's time that the political tides are changing. Kwasi Kwarteng, I think, is the 88th Conservative to announce that he's standing down. And I think that just, when there is a high number of people announcing their retirement just before a general election, it often signals that that's because they know that the election that's coming up is a change election.
OK. What do you make of what the Prime Minister said about this £1,000 bet? I did have the Work and Pensions Minister, Secretary of State, on this morning, and he was trumpeting the fact that the government were giving people who were struggling in this cost of living crisis an extra £300. And I put it to him that how he felt about the Prime Minister betting 3 times that amount. Would you bet 3 times that amount that asylum seekers will find themselves in Rwanda before the next election?
I think you're referring to the Piers Morgan situation. I didn't see it. It's not. I'm not a gambling man, so I'm not going to get involved in whether I would bet or not. I'm not a betting person. But I think what the Prime Minister was very clear about is that we have to get those boats down.
Television presenter £1,000.
Yeah.
I mean, crass. Surely.
Well, as I say, I haven't seen it, so I don't know exactly how it unravelled at the time. Well, it may be these things tend to get into the papers.
It's
but
something that
look,
you wouldn't
the
have done.
most important, Kate, the really important
Is
thing.
it something you wouldn't have done?
Well, I'm not a gambling person, so I just probably wouldn't have entered into bets on anything, even the Grand National. But look,
is it
the
appropriate
point,
that he would?
the point. What is appropriate is, and what people really care about here is not these kind of sideshows that may occupy newsprint, but is getting the boats down. That's the important thing.
That's as close as you get to a cabinet minister criticising the Prime Minister.
I thought so.
It's just clear as daylight. I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have bet on the Grand National, you know, and then basically trying to call it tittle-tattle. That's the lowest, weakest attempt to defend Rishi Sunak I think I can remember of any member of his cabinet. And it comes, you know, the point about that exchange with Piers Morgan, and actually, you know, listening to Rishi Sunak try not very well to defend it this morning, is like he just gets dragged into stuff, you know. But you've got to deal with more difficult people than Piers Morgan. You've got to deal with Vladimir Putin.
I've never heard the comparison made between Piers and Vladimir Putin.
It wasn't a comparison. That's the point.
OK. He's on the phone.
Which one?
Yeah, very good. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Let's bring in Alistair Bruce, should we? Standing by for us outside Buckingham Palace. Hello to you. We heard this shocking news, didn't we, yesterday, that the King has cancer. Where do we go from here?
Well, for the King, it's extremely serious. He needs to now follow his doctor's instructions and set about the treatment that we know has already begun. And I think anybody who knows how vicious cancer can be, it is something that will be concentrating his mind. And also for the Queen and other members of the family who will want the very best for the King. But I think because he's head of state and because he's head of the Commonwealth, there is interest in him all over the world in different degrees. And so, you know, a man who is just so energetic in his 75th year, he, at the age of 75, and he just will mind so much that he can't get on with the reign that he had waited so long to get started, because he's now got to deal with this. But this was going to be a big year for him, and perhaps when we get through the immediate challenge, we'll see where His Majesty goes from there.
OK, Alistair, for now, thanks very much indeed. Sam, we've heard from Rishi Sunak speaking about the King and his health condition earlier on today.
Well, obviously, like everyone else, you're shocked and sad, and just all our thoughts are with him and his family. And, you know, thankfully, this has been caught early, and now everyone will be wishing him that he gets the treatment that he needs and makes a full recovery. I think that's what we're all hoping and praying for, and I'm, of course, in regular contact with him, and we'll continue to communicate with him as normal.
How important are those regular chats, weekly chats, the audience with the King, and can they be done over Zoom?
Yes, they're important. Yes, they can be done over Zoom. I think the relationship between the monarchy and the Prime Minister and the monarchy and the government more generally, I think people underestimate it. It's absolutely vital to the functioning of this country. Those fibre optic cables between Downing Street and Buckingham Palace, the officials to the courtiers and back again, are very, very busy. The monarchy sets the tone for the whole of the rest of the political situation. The people who work in Downing Street, many of them worked in Buckingham Palace, and the links are very, very tight. I think that there is an anxiety this morning across Whitehall at this. It signals a return to just a higher level of instability. You just rewind 16 months.
Explain that to me in more detail.
Wind back 16 months. King Charles took over the throne at a point where Liz Truss was Prime Minister. We were going through, you know, constitutional, economic, social turmoil. 5 weeks later, Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. And there was a transition, the first transition in 70-odd years of a monarch. But that managed to provide continuity, stability and security and helped take down the sort of the fraying political temperature. And King Charles, who could have been a very different type of monarch, he could have been the sort of reformer, he could have been the kind of revolutionary monarch, actually decided to do something to sort of calm the nation after years of quite fractious discourse between the nations, between our relations with other countries, but he has taken down that temperature and provided, as I say, continuity and stability. And I just think that this is unsettling for people. If you see the King step back, you would have to see a little bit more of William stepping up. Is he ready? Will he do it? How will he do it? Those are the kind of questions being asked in Whitehall right now.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. And there was a lot of instability, as you said, after the Queen died. It was such a shock. Most of us had only ever known the Queen on the throne. And then of course, Charles, he prepared all his life for this, and he steps up. And within a year of being crowned, he's having to step back again. We can't underestimate the challenges for some people who very much rely on the royal family for not their everyday lives, of course, but for that level of stability for the country.
For that level of stability and for the work that they do with charities, with lots of organisations that they're patrons of, that they highlight and work with, everything from the Rare Breed Survival Trust for the King through to so many things about people in society, the Prince's Trust, the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, all of those things that for many people are part of the fabric of their lives. And it also, again, I think brings into focus this slimmed-down version of the working royals. Will you maybe now need to see people like Eugenie and Beatrice utilised more? Because, if you've also got Catherine, who's unwell, they've got 3 children. You've got Harry, who's out of the fold, Andrew, who's out of the fold. The others are all over the age of 50. Now, I'm not saying they're not incredibly busy themselves, but at some point, they're also going to have to be looking at how their diaries work. And it's a moment of inflection, surely.
Just looking for that name of the Act again, the Regency Act 1937. You mentioned Beatrice there. She's actually been added to that list, whereas Andrew and Harry have been taken off it. William, Edward and Anne are also on the list.
I mean, I think everybody just hopes it doesn't come to that, but there's at the very core, there's nothing that the British state likes less than uncertainty. It spends its entire existence contingency planning, hoping that it's not going to have to do that.
Yeah, and around the world, political leaders have been quick to offer their support.
Yeah, very quick. We've had President Biden, we've had even former President Trump, we've had the Canadian leader, the French President Emmanuel Macron, we've had all leaders from all over the world, as well as political leaders here in the UK, with an outpouring of sentiment for the King. The Prime Minister, again this morning, reiterating that he was sad to hear about the news, but that nonetheless they were going to be cracking on with government business alongside the King, and he was going to maintain to have those regular meetings and audiences with the King as well.
Here's a question. Could it impact on a general election?
I don't think it would impact on the result, but...
The timing of it, I meant. You're both looking at me thinking, that's a good question, we don't know the answer.
We should look into that.
There is no answer, there is no playbook, there is no manual for this. But consider this. Imagine there's a change of government in the UK, a change of government in the US, and God forbid, nobody wants a change of monarch all at the same time. That is an awful lot for everybody to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, his condition, he does have cancer, but they're saying that he's remaining positive. He started treatment straight away.
Yeah. Outpatient treatment straight away. We don't know for how long. We know that he's, like we've been saying, continuing to kind of do the duties of state, the operations of state, and his personal life is having a reduction in the amount of kind of face-to-face contact time he's giving people. But you've got to be led by what we've got, and we don't really have all that much to go on, do we?
No, I thought it was interesting I've been saying all morning, we learned a lot to start with, and now the Buckingham Palace have been very cautious, and Rhiannon is down at the Palace for us, and she was saying that the Palace have said, there's no more update today, cool your jets, we're not telling you any more for now.
I think the difficulty for the royal family as well is they might have these very kind of deeply personal family crises, family difficulties, and they're often played out in the public eye in a way that most of us wouldn't have to deal with. And I think just on a human level as well, that must be very, very difficult for Charles.
Yeah, I'm sure one of the pictures that we'll see apart from this in the coming days is the moment that Harry gets off the plane at London Heathrow and heads straight to see his father. We will, of course, continue our coverage on the King's announcement of cancer throughout the day here on Sky.